this congregation, our congregation's green team, which is led by Jim Somerville, who's sitting in the back. Thank you so much, Jim, for organizing this event. One of my seminary classmates was the founding director of GIPL, the last executive director of GIPL. So I'm a friend of this organization, and I'm so proud that our church is able to host this event. Why don't I open our time together with prayer? Let us pray. Almighty God, we know that you spoke, and this world, this beautiful world, came to existence. We pray today that with our words, through listening, through speaking, through sharing, that we might heal some of the wounds humankind has inflicted on your beautiful creation. Use the words spoken this day. Use this time that we have together to bring healing, that we might bring healing to the world you created. Amen. Yeah, brother. Yeah, go ahead. Use that one. Thank you. Yeah, man.
Good morning, everybody. That's some power there. You don't have to talk loud at all. Thank you all for being here. My name is Cody Norrid. I serve as the Executive Director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And welcome to our 2022 Green Team Summit. It's been forever since we've been able to have an in-person summit. This is our favorite event of the year, so it's a real pleasure to be able to bring it back this year. Thank you, everybody who is here, because after taking a couple of years off from a Green Team Summit, starting at 9:15 is on a Saturday. That's a lot to be asking of people. So I appreciate those of you who are here right now, and people will be trickling in all day. We've got a great crowd. We have a great lineup of speakers that are coming to you today. The purpose of our Green Team Summit is to inspire and equip green teams all across the state to do the work of caring for our sacred earth. And today we'll be inspiring and equipping each other as we do this work. So a little bit about how today's going to go. I'm going to blabber on for a few minutes. Then I'm going to introduce one of my good friends who is going to give us a rousing call. We'll have a couple of plenary speakers, and then we will do a voting rights training. We'll have some lunch. We'll have an interview with the EPA Region 4 Administrator, Daniel Blackman. We'll do an in-person coffee and something stronger right in this lovely piece of the stage. Then we'll have a wonderful lunch, and we will make our way into workshops. So it's going to be a day of a lot of great stuff. Very excited about it. I want to thank First Presbyterian Church Marietta, and we also have a list of other sponsors, including Faith in Public Life, Dancing Goats Coffee, because getting up and doing this right now would not be possible without them, so very grateful. South Face, Energy Institute, Environment Georgia, the Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta, as well as St. Luke's Presbyterian. Thank you all for sponsoring. This wouldn't be possible without you all. In addition to our sponsors, we have some partners today, which you'll see. We've got two wonderful plenary speakers from Georgia Conservation Voters. We've got good representatives from Creation Justice Ministries and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, Emory University, the EPA, Concerned Citizens for Cook County, and the Southern Environmental Law Center. So a lot of people with a lot of expertise who are here to tell you a lot of things today. So we're in for a real treat. Today isn't always, or only rather, just about inspiration and being equipped, but all of that is so that we might be empowered to take action. So today we've got a lot of things for you to take action on. There are 4 things that I would love for you to do for me or for God, whichever one motivates you most, to take action on today. So these are 4 things. 1, we have a postcard that deals with public health and air pollution that we'd love for you to fill out. You would have got that when you registered this morning. If you haven't gotten one of those postcards, they're out on the tables out front. You can fill those out and leave them with us. We're going to make a drop-by of those to our Senate offices to push for some legislation around air pollution. the integrated resource plan, which is about how our energy decisions are made. You'll hear a little bit about that in a workshop later today, but on the advocacy table, you'll see there's a way to send a message to your public service commissioners on the issue of net metering, so ensuring that solar can be more accessible to all of those who are in Georgia. There's also the Faith, Climate, and Justice Voter Campaign. You'll see some QR codes on your table. We've got a huge training on that today, so more on that later. And then a Drawdown Georgia solution that we're working on, which is trying to rein in the pollution from heavy trucks. So you'll see on the advocacy table out there a QR code and some handouts on how you can make a super easy comment to the EPA on how important it is to regulate those things. So we're inspiring and equipping each other, and then we're putting our feet into movement and doing some action today. Sound good? Thank you, Juan. Does it sound good to everybody else? Thank you. Inspire and equip each other. The next person that I want to introduce is an amazing friend who has been a part of this work since I was involved in it. So blessed to have partners in the Southeast who are pillars of justice, who are doing this hard work beside us, because Georgia is not an island. We're connected to other states around us. And so I will introduce you to the executive director of the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, the one, the only, Reverend Michael Malcolm.
Y'all act like y'all didn't come out at 9-something in the morning to get here. I know I did, and I am tired. But let me say, I'm tired, but it's not just this physical tiredness that I'm feeling. I got up, I left late last night to drive here, got here early this morning. I've had a few hours of sleep, but I had to be here because I'm tired. I'm tired of things being the way that it is. And it seems as if, though, my suffering goes in silence. I'm tired because I fight with all of my energy to make this world better, while those who we've elected make decisions that seem like it's only making it worse. I'm tired because I continue to see my beloved community suffer under the burden of energy burdens while I sit and I stand and I speak and I fight and nothing is being done. But then I see that there are those who are running for office, those who are still marching in the streets, those who are waking up at 9 o'clock in the morning to be here and collectively come together to fight for a better tomorrow. And it energizes me. And so when I lift my hands in the air and I wave them like I just don't care, I'm doing that because I'm energized to seeing your faces, because you're excited about being here to change things. And we do it collectively. That's what I need you all to hear right there. I really wanted to drive myself to a point to really point out the fact that if we don't change this collectively, we cannot expect for it to truly change. Collectivism, us working together to change things for a better tomorrow. This means that for those of us who are of a darker hue, we can no longer be ignored by those of you who are of a lighter hue. What affects me and my community affects all of us. Here's how. The same pollution that's choking out my people is the same pollution that's choking out my planet. If you don't help me as a people, you can't help this planet. If you ignore me as a people, you ignore everything that's happening to this planet. But if you can solve what is happening to me, if you can solve for the suffering that I feel, that we feel, then you can solve the suffering that this planet feels. We can go into congregations all day long and ask us to change the way that our houses of worship are set up. We can ecologically change the things that are happening in our houses of worship. But if we fail to see the congregants and the suffering of the congregants in our houses of worship, then we missed it all. We can't have environmentalism without environmental justice. There can be no climate justice without community justice. Today, I'm excited. And I'm excited because I see a group of people who are fighting to make this thing better, to make this planet better, to make this place better, to make Georgia my home of origin, better. And you've done it collectively. You've done it as a green team or as green teams. And now I ask that you dip in, lean in. I ask that you just surround yourself today with the education, the training that you'll get, because I need you to take this message. I need you to take these trainings. I need you to take these lessons that you'll get today so you can take them back to your congregations and let them know ain't nobody free until we all free. I'm going to say that again because I know that was my country just came out. Ain't nobody free until we are all free. Okay, they told me the third time's the charm because I see ain't too many people getting excited about that. And I need some folks to really just throw your hands in the air and wave them like you just don't care, or pump your fist like this. I need you to really put it up in the air for me one more time as I say, ain't nobody free until we are all free. So, we're fighting today. We come today. We came to get tools. We came to get resources that we can go back and collectively take back so we can have collective action. So the things that you did in Georgia to turn Georgia blue, it can continue to go on throughout the South, because just as the South goes, so goes the nation. We can either take it in a good way, we can take it in a bad way. And I just believe that the faces that I'm looking at, you're going to take it in a good way. And you don't care who knows it. So one more time, can I just do it one more time? And this time I need y'all to make a whole bunch of noise and really, really get pumped up. If you want to scream and holler, you all right, because you in good company. Ain't nobody free until we are all free. Can I get some noise for that? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Right now, we're getting ready to hear from Sister, no, not Rev. Rev, you finna, listen, I just got y'all warmed up. We get ready to take off. I hope you buckled up in your seat, because it's finna be on and popping up in here. Y'all can go back and take that one and look somebody in the face when this is over. Go back and tell your cousin and them that we had a good time, and Reverend Warren came up and she made it on and popping. All right? All right.
Well, Reverend Malcolm has set the stage. Reverend Malcolm, I'm doing the same thing. Reverend Malcolm has set the stage. We might as well open the doors of the church and pass the offering plate. No need for me to give you a sermonette this morning, because Reverend Malcolm did his thing. Anybody ready to wave their hands in the air and wave them like they just don't care for climate? Anybody want to wave their hands in the air like they just don't care for environmental justice? I know that's right this morning. We are going to inspire and equip. Amen, amen, amen. Listen, I want to my name is Minister Juan Smith. I am delighted to be here. I am the organizing director for Georgia Conservation Voters Education Fund. I want to start off by lifting up this house, the shepherd of this house. I am peacock proud and delighted that First Presbyterian Marietta has opened up its doors, its halls for us, that not only are they doing spiritual work, but they are doing social work and continuing in the legacy of Jesus in this way by ensuring that we are good stewards and ensuring that we are both our brothers and our sisters keepers on today. I want to lift up Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, my good friend, Reverend Cody. We have been co-laborers in the faith for a number of years now on this environmental justice and ecological road. I have a number of friends in the house this morning. When I walked in, I was super excited. I have to shout out Miss Karen. I have to shout out Miss Betty. I have to shout out my homie Gayla, who is now a part of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Woo, 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 woo. And brothers and sisters, I am glad to see your faces in the place this morning, so give yourselves a round of applause. Now let me tell you, Reverend Malcolm was point on. If you thought he was high energy, I am high energy as well. What you won't believe is that Reverend Malcolm comes from the UCC faith, but I am a Baptist preacher. Yeah. So let me tell you what that means for us collectively, for the collective us this morning. Reverend Cody told me to open with a sermonette. And in my faith tradition, we believe in call and response. And so while I have the utmost intention of this being a short and sweet sermonette, the only way that I can assure you that it will be short and sweet is if you give me a little call and response. The more you interact with me, the more the Holy Spirit says, keep it on time, you ain't got to show out today, okay? So we're going to practice a little collectivism. And while, again, my job is to continue in the spirit that has both inspired and equipped me to inspire and equip you, and we use humor to do that, right? Because we want to make sure that we enjoy activism. You know, the world around us can be a dark and grim place, but there has to be grace and there has to be joy along the way while we're doing this work. So it's going to be peppered with some, lightheartedness here and there. And this is serious business. Can I get an amen, somebody? So just for a couple of moments this morning, if I can, if you will allow me, I'd like to speak to you on the subject of mockery of democracy. And as we embark upon the subject of a mockery of democracy, I'm going to ask my ancestors to sit down and take up residence in this place and to be with me on this morning. I'm going to ask the Creator to come in and to flow from heart to heart and breast to breast this morning. I'm going to ask that revolutionary, radical Messiah who came some 2,000 years ago and gave us an example of how to be on earth would endow our very presence as we collectively embark on a journey to discover how it is we can revolutionize a mockery of democracy. Is that okay? We just practicing. Okay, so who in here enjoys a good story? Perhaps you like to read yours or listen to audio books, look at a movie, or binge watch a series. Is there anyone who would be honest enough to admit that you love piping hot tea from your BFF or catching up on the latest happenings from the barber shop? Regardless of your preference, regardless of how you connect with this content, most of us love a good setting. Most of us enjoy story development and learning about characters, and who does not get wrapped up in the exhilaration, right, of a plot twist? Folklore, folk tales, fairy tales, scary tales, mysteries, fables, romance, science fiction, nonfiction, fiction. Stories have the unique ability to help us reimagine the possibilities of future reality, learn about the realities of days gone by, and sometimes they help us just to escape the realities of today. Sometimes stories mimic life, and sometimes real life seems surreal. In the last 6 years, has there been a day that you woke up and thought there is no way the current events are really happening? This scenario is too George Orwell, too RoboCop, too Designated Survivor. This is a spoof made for TV. This cannot be real. Have you ever thought that what was happening in our country was a mockery of democracy? Outlandish, upsetting, and barbarous, but then realized this is our current existence. This is our actuality. This is the United States as we know it. Gerrymandering to dilute and depose the power of minorities, voter suppression to intimidate and dissuade, local, state, and federal officials sanctioning dangerous pipelines in backyards, toxic industries in residential neighborhoods, and profit in exchange for dirty air, dirty water, and contaminated soil. Governors who knowingly demand price gouging when people are dying during winter storms. The president and members of Congress inciting and supporting a coup d'etat. 253 bills in 43 states aimed at restricting access to the ballot box for tens of millions of people. In addition, there are so much things going on. White fragility so treacherous that hateful racist laws are created in an effort to redefine America as a nation in which blacks, minorities, women, and anyone who loves or looks differently is subordinate and should not have access to political, environmental, and social equality. This all under the guise of the law. This all within the bounds of the Constitution. This all within the construct of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I'm gonna ask you again. In the last 6 years, has there ever been a moment where you rose to the gracious Georgia sun, woke up and thought, this is not reality, this is not the United States of America, this is science fiction, this is a scary movie, this is some poorly written dystopian novel, this is a mockery of democracy. A mockery of, somebody got it, a mockery of democracy, a mockery of democracy, and yet a mockery of democracy is nothing new. In the Bible, in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, Jesus opens by addressing a crowd and his disciples in his usual manner. He doesn't pull punches or sugarcoats his message, but he serves it straight up with no chaser. He says in verses 3 and 4, the scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do what they teach you, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger. And then in the 23rd verse, Jesus says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. I skipped the verses in the middle because Jesus was reading the scribes and the Pharisees for filth. But these verses highlight that even during antiquity, there were self-centered leaders who made a mockery of their governing structure. And by the way, for those of you who don't know what reading for filth means, it is the millennial/Generation Z way of saying to harshly criticize someone or to call them out to the furthest extent. Just a little bit of translation to make sure we're on the same page. A little more context. The Pharisees and Sadducees were not just religious leaders. They were the political leaders of Israel during Jesus' time. It was normal Roman practice to leave most of the running of the local government to the local leaders. In return for their support, for the Roman rule, they were able to keep their wealth and privilege. In case you missed that, even in Jesus' time, the political leaders used their position in government as a means to secure privilege and wealth, a mockery of democracy. So here we have Jesus. Y'all know Jesus, right? Mary's little baby, fed the 5,000, healed the blind man, Christmas, Easter, Jesus. Y'all know Jesus, right? Christmas, Jesus. Jesus understood how the unjust actions of the government impacted the poor, the marginalized, widows, and those who didn't have connections to the system of power. And in response, Jesus, same dude, y'all, Jesus, Christmas, Easter Jesus, because some of y'all don't know the radical side, we just know the Christmas and Easter Jesus. This same Jesus fought to right the wrongs of the system. He pointed out the hypocrisy. He used his gifts and talents. I'm going to say that again. He used his gifts and talents to help those in need and used his power to directly oppose oppression. When Jesus, who already had a reputation for being radical, went to the temple on the Sabbath and stood up to read, they handed him a scroll and he picked a place, and this is what he said. Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus' assignment is our assignment. Jesus' assignment is our assignment. Third time's a charm, Rev. Jesus' assignment is our assignment. Colette Brody Grun explained it this way. To bring good news to the poor meant preaching outside of the religious establishment in places no self-respecting rabbi would set foot. To proclaim release to the prisoners meant speaking and acting against the empire and religious leaders who had allied with it. To let the oppressed go free and proclaim the year of Jubilee and the Lord's favor would mean undermining the empire's economy. It would require returning the land that had been sold and freeing slaves that were indentured. Even healing the blind became politically charged when Jesus did it on the Sabbath. Does anyone recognize when the most compassionate and caring things become political issues and are divisive and bring turmoil? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among us, deriving their powers from consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter it. Brothers and sisters, it is time for us to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. We are the saviors that the 21st century has been waiting for. Do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on the shoulders of others. Burdens like high energy bills. Burdens like pollution that causes cancer alleys and lung disease. burdens that cause sea levels to rise, burdens that divide the haves from the have-nots, burdens that discriminate based on race, gender, and orientation. Together, collectively, brothers and sisters, we can fight to preserve our earth and fight for climate. We can fully emancipate women. We can realize equity for blacks, indigenous people, and anyone who is oppressed. Each of you have the power to make democracy a real thing. How, you ask? I love the call and response. Thanks for your inquiry. Thank you for asking. Vote in the Public Service Commission race. Vote out anyone who seeks to make a mockery out of our democracy. That goes for D's and R's. Get involved and stay involved in your local in issues. Educate others and encourage them to participate in civic engagement. If you have an EMC, participate in your electric membership corporation. If you have a municipal utility, attend the city meetings. Educate yourself on all of the down ballot races, especially the Public Service Commission race. Recycle, take public transit, ride a bike, walk when possible. Support businesses that support your issues. Support organizations like GIPL, like Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, like SACE, like Georgia Conservation Voters that are doing the work. Volunteer. Tell everyone you know to vote in the Public Service Commission race. Did I say that already? Always an organizer, always an organizer. But can I tell you a little something about the gospel? No matter how outlandish, upsetting, or barbarous, no matter what's going on, there is always good news in the gospel. Can I say that again? There is always good news in the gospel. There is always a squad of folks willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that justice flows like a river. And we have some here today, Reverend Cody. We have folks who are doing wonderful work, folks that are doing reparative work, folks that are doing life-giving, planet-sustaining work. There is good news in the gospel. This God, who is known by many names, has always been on the side of the oppressed, has always worked through those who would avail themselves to manifest justice and mercy. Did I tell y'all there was good news in the gospel? Divinity is not neutral. That's the good news. No matter where you seek divinity and no matter where you have found it, divinity calls those on its path to do justice and mercy. And that is the good news. Perhaps your path hasn't taken you by the Bible. Surah says, indeed, Allah orders justice and good conduct and giving to relatives and forbids immorality and bad conduct and oppression. He admonishes you that perhaps you will be reminded. The Nevi'im says, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Krishna told Arjuna, whenever righteousness is on the decline, unrighteousness is in the ascendant. Then I am reincarnated for the protection of the virtuous, for the righteousness of those who believe in righteousness, and for the establishing of Dharma on a firm footing. I am born from age to age. Brothers and sisters, we have called you here collectively to ask, will you do justice and vote on May 24th? Will you do justice and become a drum major and tell everyone everywhere you go the importance of voting, the importance of donating, speaking up in pivotal moments and activating your activism and personal agency? Will you, my brothers and sisters, collectively do mercy? and not just advocate for climate and conservation, but for a just transition and equitable access for minorities, the poor and downtrodden. Will you, brothers and sisters, come together collectively and do mercy and use your privilege to assist communities that have been impacted by centuries of oppression, redlining, toxic dumping, and environmental injustice? Everyone in this room has a role in the story called real life. You are not a fictional character whose part ends when the credits roll. You are a person who can directly impact this moment. When the history books of tomorrow write about today, will your legacy be one that fought for justice, mercy, and faith? We dictate how this story ends. We dictate how close we get or how far removed we stay from 2 degrees. We dictate what happens to the least of these. We have the power to be the saviors that we need in this moment. The Spirit, my brothers and sisters, is upon us. Jesus' assignment, my brothers and sisters, is our collective assignment. Will you do justice? Will you love mercy? And will you walk humbly and use your privilege for the least of these? Amen. Give yourselves a round of applause. Amen. Give yourselves a round of applause. So again, as we transition into the next portion of our presentation, both myself, who is the organizing director for Georgia Conservation Education Fund, as well as the executive director of GCV. GCV has the Education Fund, which is C3. GCV has C4, as well as a PAC. And our executive director over all 3 of those entities is the wonderful Briante McCorkle. Briante, yes, shout out. Woo, 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 woo. Briante has a presentation to ensure that we are all level set, to ensure that we have some education to ground our action. Amen, somebody? Education goes a long way. When you know better, you do better. There are a bunch of important issues that are before us. We are in the midst of the integrated resource planning process. The integrated resource planning process happens every 3 years. And for those of us who love the planet, for those of us who are committed to carbon emissions reduction and trying to get us to 100% goal. Shout out to California, who has a 2040 goal, a 2040 goal for the entire state. For those of us who are trying to do that work city by city in this great state of Georgia, the IRP is a plan that allows us to have input on the utility decision-making process. And as I alluded to in the sermonette, and Brianna, you can come forward. As I alluded to in my sermonette, there are 3 different types of utility mechanisms. There are investor-owned, the investor-owned utilities, Georgia Power here in Georgia, woo, 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 woo. And the Public Service Commission provides oversight for Georgia Power, but there are also EMCs, and the power of EMCs is that at the heart of EMCs, the structure is a nonprofit structure and a one that is based on democratic principles, where it is shareholder owned, right? So not shareholder owned. The member owners, the members are the owners. So it is a co-op structure. And in that co-op structure itself, it means that the oversight is provided by the people who pay the bills. The people who pay the bills are the actual owners. And there are a number of opportunities, if those of us who have EMCs would just step up to the plate and get involved, that we could turn tides. And what one thing most people don't know is that while Georgia Power has the most customers in Georgia, EMCs have the most service territory. So they have the largest geographic territory and landmass in the state. And then finally, there are municipal utilities. So whether it's the county or the local city government, there are a number of individuals whose city runs the utility, the electricity service. And when we hold those elected officials accountable at the city level, sometimes they're commissioners. In some instances, the cities actually vote for a utility commissioner. But in most of those instances, it's really the mayor and that local city government who have control. That is the way that we are able to be a part of the utility decision-making process. And utilities are the largest, right, like the largest pollutant and have the largest contribution to fossil fuels and emissions. So there's a way that we can all get involved, and we don't have to mind our business. So if you have an EMC, you put your nose in Georgia Power's business and Muni business, and if you have a Muni, vice versa. We all need to be in everybody's business because this is a collective issue. And so with that, we're going to transition to the executive director of Georgia Conservation Voters, who has an amazing educational presentation. And if there's any time left, we'll open it for Q&As. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I am Briante McCorkle. I am the executive director at Georgia Conservation Voters and Georgia Conservation Voters Education Fund. So fair warning, I am not a minister, a pastor. I have no skills in that department. But I am here to talk to you all today about voting rights and climate justice, which is something that's really core to the work that we do at my organization, but also just the work that I do, for life, right? I'm in this movement, I think I'm a lifer, right? There's going to be work to be done for quite some time, and I am doing everything I can to continue to steward this planet for us now and for future generations. So I have some slides that should be coming up, but until they come up, I'm just going to talk about who we are and what we do. So I mentioned that I'm the ED of GCV and GCV Education Fund. GCV Education Fund organizes and mobilizes Georgians to, around climate and environmental justice. We really support people getting engaged civically, whatever that civic engagement may look like. Voting is, of course, one of the things I'm going to talk to you today about, but I want to be really clear that there are other forms of civic engagement that we encourage community to do and participate in as well. So yeah, we can, do I have a clicker? I do have a clicker. Does this work? It does work. Okay, cool. So that is just our mission at GCV Education Fund. It worked for a second. Now it's not working. Okay, well, I'll periodically press this button and hope the slide transitions. So the next thing that I wanted to say was that we're three organizations. So you're going to hear a lot about the work that we are doing at Georgia Conservation Voters Education Fund. I'm not going to talk as much about the work that we do through GCV or the GCV Action Fund. We are three organizations, and we're three organizations for a reason. We want to be full cycle, which is kind of why I created this circle, a cycle of accountability. The Education Fund really focuses on the education and organization of communities. We build relationships, we help empower people with information and with skills and tools to be able to take action on the issues that are coming up in their communities. It's really important that we're doing that organizing, community training, community development work, because there are so many environmental issues taking place in communities, and we need an army of people who are able to withstand attacks on the environment and attacks on people, attacks on climate. We need an army of people who are prepared and ready to stand up and fight for what we really want, which is action on climate change, which is environmental justice, which is clean air, which is clean water. And those battles take place at the state capitol, in city halls and county commissions, within homeowners associations, right? There's 1,000 places where these conflicts happen, and we want to make sure that people have the skills to navigate and to achieve the outcomes that they want for themselves. And so we do that organizing work. We are also doing the work to be in the Capitol. We were very active this year during the legislative session. I have to say I'm really proud of the work that we were able to do, some of it with people in this room, in introducing, we introduced well over 10 clean energy bills this year. And that's a big deal. I mean, usually we're spending our time fighting things, right? But we got to be proactive, and the benefit of being proactive is, you get to shape the vision, you get to shape the narrative, you get to say this is what we do want, and get people excited about this vision of the future rather than constantly fighting things and saying no. We want to get to a place where we are setting an agenda around climate and environment with legislators every year, and that we are getting support for it, we're getting these things introduced, and that we can move it through the state capitol, which is a challenge. But with all of your support and the support of people in DCV's network and beyond, I feel very good that we are going to be able to do it, and we're getting better and better at it every year. The good news is that we actually worked to establish an environmental caucus this past year, so an official caucus with the state assembly, right? It's a big deal. So we're moving through the stages. We expect it to launch early next session, but that's a huge accomplishment to have a group of people, a group of legislators who want to talk about this issue nonstop, who want to workshop these bills. And I should also say that on the House side, we have identified a Republican co-sponsor, so we can also say that this is bipartisan. And so if you know any Republican senators who really love environment, please let us know. We want to make sure that both parties and everyone in between all feel welcome in this conversation. We need everyone engaged. And so in addition to that legislative work, we do a scorecard because we know that y'all are living busy lives. And, at the end of the day, you're not going to the state General Assembly website and checking out what legislation passed that day. It's kind of hard to follow. So we do a scorecard, and we want to make sure that we're uplifting the key environmental bills that we're moving this year. We also point out places where legislators showed leadership that didn't necessarily come to a vote, because there's a lot of work that happens before a piece of legislation becomes something that's voted on. So we'll be releasing that scorecard later this summer. So, keep an eye out. It's a really good resource for understanding how legislators are voting on this issue. Fair warning, Republicans don't like it as much because it doesn't make them look great, but I think that's, a way to have a conversation with them about being active in this conversation. So we also have a political action committee. We do endorsements, and so if you're curious about that, you can check out our website as well. And we help elect candidates, incumbent legislators that have been doing great work and incoming climate champions. And we do make an effort to endorse from all political parties. So that's allows us to be full cycle, right? Doing the organizing and the education, being in the Capitol, letting people know what's going on, and then supporting the people that we know are going to be climate champions so they can get back in there and keep doing good work. So for our organizing work, that's all taking place through our education fund, and we have 3 main programs. We've got Democracy for All, Clean Energy for All, and Environmental Justice. We decided to focus on these 3 things. I don't know if y'all know, but we're pretty new, right? We just came back in 2018. I was alone for a little while. I had a team of 4 people in 2020, and then we expanded to 12 people in 2021. So we are, yes, exactly. Y'all, we're building a movement in Georgia, okay? And we got a squad of people on our team who are helping us do that. So when I started, it was sort of, what are we going to focus on? What are the things that we're going to tackle? What's important? What's pressing? And these are the things that really came up for me. Democracy for All, because we have a lot of things that at that time were happening with voting in Georgia. The main conversation at that point were voter purges, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But we were also looking at redistricting. The census was, coming up. We wanted to make sure that people understood why it was important for environmentalists to do everything they could to take the census, to help other people take the census, so that we could get accurate counts for not only federal funding, but when it came to redistricting later, which we just wrapped up in December 2021. So I'll have more to say about that in a minute. We also focused on clean energy for all because I'm kind of a nerd, and I really like thinking about carbon reduction and like how we can do it. What's the quickest and most efficient way to do it? Because climate and environment is such a big topic, when I started, it was right around the time where Georgia Drawdown was coming out. And Georgia Drawdown took the book Project Drawdown, which is full of solutions for climate change, ranked by their efficacy in terms of carbon reduction, and they took it and made it Georgia specific. And so there's 5 categories in Georgia Drawdown, and y'all, that's a big deal. We are the one of the only states that has, actually the only state that has done that has a Georgia specific Project Drawdown map. Yes, thank you for any one of you who might have been involved in that, the universities, the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, all of these people who came together who really made that possible. That gives us a lot more focus on the issues that we're advocating for. There's 5 topics. You've got energy, you've got building materials, transportation, food and agriculture, and land sinks are the 5 categories here in Georgia. But when you look at, how many megatons of carbon we could reduce by tackling each area, energy is leaps and bounds number 1, right? We could do a lot in Georgia by really transitioning to a renewable energy economy. And so that is really why energy became a top focus. So I want to be clear, we're not neglecting the other topics, just that this is the one that it's really going to be impactful, and it's also the most challenging. So we are doing a lot of work on clean energy. Juan alluded to the integrated resource plan and what's happening with the Public Service Commission. We're also expanding our engagement with electric membership co-ops. And so we're doing a lot of exciting things. And as I said, this legislative session, we got a ton of energy bills. So we're going to continue doing this work on energy. And then the final program bucket is environmental justice. And I really felt like it was important to be able to support community when they come to us and they say, hey, look, this thing is happening. And I've been in different organizations where it's like, no, that's not quite our program. And it becomes really difficult to support community when they need it. And so I wanted to have space to just, if community says this is a thing, then we're going to organize around that thing or support them to organize around that thing, and even support them with communications. One thing I'm really proud of about the work that we've been able to do in our EJ program was produce a documentary with Adel, Georgia, which is a community in South Georgia. And this community had a number of overlapping environmental issues, a propane plant and several other things. It wasn't a propane plant, it was like propane tank storage facility. But there were several other things in that community, and all of it was sort of manifesting in health issues, and we were able to work with community to help tell that story, and they've been able to use that as a catalyst for organizing in their community. And so, we want to show up when community is saying this is an issue for us, because environmental issues show up in lots of different ways outside of a formal program offering, right? And so we center environmental justice because there are really no solutions, real solutions without justice. And I feel really strongly about that. Even when we're thinking about the drawdown framework, they did look at just carbon emissions, but then they also came back and said, what are other factors that we should look at? And of course, racial justice was huge. Gender equity was also huge. Educating women became really a top solution as a result of that analysis. But, I want to be clear that environmental justice is the recognition that communities of color are on the front lines of existing environmental pollution. This is often a result of them not being a part of, being privy to be a part of decisions about development in their community. If there is engagement, it's usually very surface level and not meaningful. And if community raises concerns, it's often ignored. And these facilities go up in their communities all of the time. And this is like existing environmental pollution. This is air pollution. This is water pollution, right? This is toxics in communities. And this has been happening for decades, probably centuries if you really want to take the timeline back. And so that is, we want to make sure that people have fair treatment, meaningful involvement in all development decisions in their communities. That's what it means, and that we are actively going in and cleaning up some of the toxics in communities. And so that's what we focus on when we're talking about environmental justice. And climate justice takes that concept a little bit further because it recognizes that climate change, which is causing more droughts, flooding, wildfires, heat waves, disease outbreak, right? More communities of color will feel the impact of that, and they will feel that impact of that first, and addressing this is climate justice. So, environmental justice, for me, it's like this existing pollution that's been in communities for a long time, and then climate is like, not only have they been facing this, but now they're also gonna be the brunt of facing climate change. And so, it's already happening. It's already happening here in Georgia. We've seen superstorms come in. We've seen how it's unjustly impacted communities of color and lower income communities throughout the state. The storms, who can move, who is able to pick up and rebuild quickly after a storm. Of course, a hurricane came in and took out a bunch of crops, so that hurt farmers. Farmers aren't necessarily balling out of control, right? We have a lot of incidences here in Georgia, and if you think about it on a global scale, I've been reading a lot of news, right? So dangerous, right? We can't read too much news. But I was reading about the fact that a town in South Africa, I can't remember the exact name, got more rain in a day than it typically receives in 9 months. This is not the first time I've heard that China a couple of years ago had an incident like that. These extreme rainfall events, which are a manifestation of climate change. That particular community, the community that it wasn't Johannesburg that got hit, it wasn't Cape Town, right? Because those are, high ground, right? Those areas have been surveyed. They're the better land, right? So the lower income people are left in the flood zones. The lower income people are left on land that's less resilient to that type of thing. So what we saw were mudslides, and hundreds of people did not make it through that storm. Hundreds and hundreds of people of color did not make it through that storm, right? South Africa does have, a diverse population, but the community hit was a community of color, right? I was also reading about, in the Horn of Africa, right? The hunger crisis is getting more extreme because the droughts are getting more extreme. Droughts are also a manifestation of climate change. So we talk about environmental justice, we talk about climate justice, and we talk about them in the lens of America, but this is global, right? Even in America, we're insulated to some degree. But outside of our borders, there are people who will be experiencing extreme weather events, extreme drought, extreme flooding, who will be people of color, and they are looking to the U.S. to act, because we are one of the countries who are producing a ton of pollution. And other industrial countries, like China and India, are looking at the U.S. to lead. Because if we don't lead, they're like, well, if you're not doing it, then why should we? You've benefited from this, why can't we? So I really want to put that global perspective in. There's a huge responsibility, obviously, on all parties to deal with this, but especially here in the U.S., especially here. And so this is why this work is so important. Political power is really important. I just want to, if we could go back, I don't know if I can control thank you. I just want to be really clear about political power, because communities that are most impacted by climate change and environmental injustice are also the strongest supporters of climate action, right? We've seen 1 million polls that say this, but I have had an epiphany, right? And I'm really focused on how do we reach voters? How do we know a voter is pro-environmental, right? How do we make sure that they know that we need them to come out and not sit out this election, right? That's something I've been really chewing on since I started. Well, I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with the Yale Center for Climate Change Communications. They have that alarmed voter model, where they categorize America by 6 different categories, right? And everything from, I don't think climate change is a thing. I don't know who those people are, but there's some people out there, all the way to, I am very extremely worried about climate change. I'm very alarmed. And so for a while, it was just sort of these heat maps that we were looking at, right? You could kind of see it on a heat map. But now I can map that score to the voter activation network. So I have found 1.5 million alarmed voters in Georgia. Out of 7.5 million registered voters, that's about 20%. All you need to create a movement is 3.5%. Y'all, we are getting close. We are getting there. And I want to be clear that if we could mobilize that group of people consistently in elections, then we can really make elected officials feel responsible for addressing climate change, feel responsible for doing things that keep this base of environmental voters happy. And so that is work that we are working very hard at. And I just want to say also about that score, this is the first score, because I've seen lots of scores in the Voter Activation Network, which, by the way, for y'all who are not familiar, if you get in texts and emails, or maybe not emails, but texts and mailers and that kind of thing, these candidates are finding your information through the Voter Activation Network. That's how you find registered voters. That is public information in Georgia. And so there's a database that people use to try to find people that they think will be responsive to their campaign. So that's what the Voter Activation Network is. And this is I've seen lots of scores in that database. This is the first score I've ever seen that was majority people of color, which was consistent with all of the polling data that we were receiving. All of the other scores pulled up older, whiter voters, which we know are a huge base of environmentalists, but we knew that there were a bunch of younger people of color who were missing from those scores, and this is the first one that has pulled them up. So I'm really excited. I'm gonna be testing it and be nerding out on spreadsheets most of this year, y'all, but doing this work of finding the environmental voters is important, because elected officials need to know that we are big enough, that we are active, that we are voting, that we have that power, and we have to expand this movement. So I've only got a little bit longer, so I'll move quickly, but the group of color that's most impacted by climate change, the group that is most impacted by climate change, environmental pollution, is also impacted by voter suppression. And we got to make sure that they're not only voting, but that they're a part of the discussions as we are coming up with policies to transition to a renewable energy economy, as we are coming up with different ways of living on this planet, right? We have to make sure that all groups are engaged so that we're thinking about comprehensive solutions. Without it, we really are missing out. And I think about solar a lot when I talk about this. Solar is great. It's a wonderful solution. It also is really limited right now to people who can afford to put these solar panels on their houses. If everyone who can afford to put solar on their houses does, and they all got batteries and they're all off the grid and everybody's free, what about people who can't do that? Then they're left basically holding the bag for dirty energy, right? They're getting their energy from natural gas and the existing fossil fuel plants. They're not benefiting from this clean energy economy. The natural gas is still burning. Have we solved this problem, right? We have not. So we have to make sure that we are being inclusive in these discussions as we're crafting policy. That's super important so that the solutions are thorough and that they last. We can move on to the next stage, the next slide. We can skip this one because I kind of talked about that. I just want to point out something that I learned. This is actually, when I first gave this presentation similar to this, we were in the middle of COVID. The first initial 2020, like, oh, COVID's a thing. That was when I first put this slide together because Albany was emerging as a hotspot. And I actually learned last night from Daniel Blackman, who is our EPA Region 4 administrator, that Albany was the 4th most affected in the world in terms of per capita infections. In the world. In Albany, Georgia. Majority POC county. They've got a lot of, fossil fuel stuff going on, a natural gas compressor station in that community. They've got sky-high power bills, older housing stock, right? It is very clear that these environmental issues had really impacted this community and made it so that COVID was able to ravage it so quickly. Obviously, it's not 1, 2, 3 environmental issues, COVID, but it is, factors that add layers, right, that prevent a community from being able to be as resilient and withstand things. And so lots of different environmental issues going on in Albany, majority POC, fourth most affected in the world, in Georgia, right? It's a big deal. So we can go to the next slide. So I just want to hit on one more concept, which is the just transition. It's if the process, I have a typo, but if the process is not just, the outcome will never be. That's really important. I said before, we have to have communities at the table to be coming up with solutions that are thorough. But the just transition originally was developed by trade unions, and they wanted to make sure that as we were shifting economies to more sustainable production, more renewable energy, that we were engaging everybody, especially workers, so that we could have solutions that were just and thorough, and that we're doing it in a way that helps build power for people, political power to shift from the extractive economy to a regenerative economy. So this is a really important concept. So when you hear climate justice and just transition and all, these are what these phrases are talking about. And it's really become acute for me in Georgia because during the Integrated Resource Plan, Georgia Power announced that they're going to shut down all of these coal plants. And we're like, yay, no coal, right? Except that now all these workers are losing their jobs, right? And they're really not happy about it. And now the question is, whose responsibility is it to come up with a plan for those workers, right? And in the past, environmentalists would be like, well, that's, we did what we came to do. We got the coal plant shut down. But now we have to start thinking okay, so what is the plan? What is the transition plan for these workers? How do we show up in this space? So I just wanted to make sure I communicated that with you all, that this is it's a real challenge. This is happening right here in Georgia right now as we speak. We have to be thinking about just transition. We have to be thinking about climate justice. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so voter suppression. All right, so I'll be kind of quick with this because I feel like we've all been really engaged in the voting rights discussion here in Georgia. I mean, I don't know how you're in Georgia not talking about voting rights right now, right? It's everywhere. It is so important that we get out to vote and we help other people get out to vote. So I mentioned that when I started, voter purges were the main thing that was happening. The Secretary of State was routinely kicking off tens of thousands to sometimes hundreds of thousands of voters off of the rolls in an effort to, as they say, keep the voter rolls clean. Unfortunately, those purges often remove people whose voter registrations were accurate and up to date. And so people would get to the polls and they'd be like, wait, what do you mean I'm not registered? What do you mean? So that is one of the first things that I think was really obvious as a voter suppression tactic. And so I just want to remind everybody to check your registration. If you think you're good, just double check. Doesn't hurt. mvp.sos.ga.gov. That website recently got updated. It's a little bit easier to read, but I encourage you to check your voter registration. There are barriers. Since after the 2021 runoff, immediately there was a legislative session and they started to look at voting because we had all this historic turnout and there was all this absentee ballot voting. And so then there were all these accusations of voter fraud as well. So we saw the legislature, the leadership in the legislature prioritize voting, changes to voting. And so I'm going to talk through just a couple that I think are, ongoing, or just, adding to the difficulty of voting in Georgia. So creating barriers to absentee ballot voting, that includes shortening the time frame for when you can request a ballot and submit it, so that's been changed. They've added ID requirements, which they used to use signature verification, and now they've added an ID requirement. And to be clear, that is very cumbersome for people who just, like, it's taken for granted that people have printers at their houses and can just easily scan. Like, it's a big barrier when you don't have that and you don't have public transportation, when you got a part-time job, right? It becomes this extra thing that makes it harder to get this ballot in. And then reducing drop box locations, we saw them really like tackle the drop box issue. And so those are all changes to absentee ballot voting. They've also banned voting buses and line warming. So you can't put people on a bus and take them to the polls anymore. So that's really unfortunate because obviously a lot of people have transportation challenges. And so you can't do that. You can't hand out water. You can't like make it more comfortable for people to stand in line and wait to vote. All of that's been changed. And even PPE kits, we were giving out masks and hand sanitizers. Can't do that, can't do that anymore. That's changed. Provisional ballots cast in the wrong precinct won't count. So before, if you went to the wrong location on voting day, election day, which is quite common because, it's not always obvious, you would be able to cast a provisional ballot. They tell you we're at the wrong place, and that ballot would still count. Well, now it won't count. So you need to make sure you check that mvp.sos.ga.gov website and make sure you show up at the right place on election day. I encourage people to vote early because you have way more locations to vote early. And in person, yes. Because, vote early, vote in person. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry. So a couple more changes. Election results will be reported more quickly. So they've shortened the time for calculating ballots. They've added round-the-clock counting. Ballots will be printed on a special security paper. There's a lot of, these are hyperlinks. I'll make sure that y'all can get this so you can read why some of these things are concerning. Digital images of paper ballots are now public records. Poll watch, so you got to be careful what you write on the ballot. Some people like to write in the margins, so be mindful. It's public now. Poll watchers gain more access to ballot counting. So now both political parties want people in the counting room to make sure that there's no sketchy activity going on. Creating new chain of custody procedures for ballots. A new law enforcement hotline will handle complaints on election day. That doesn't replace the hotlines that advocacy groups have created, but there's now an official law enforcement hotline. Election funding from outside sources has been cut. That's really problematic for county election offices, especially smaller ones who are understaffed, underfunded. They used to rely on grants to help beef up their operations. They can't do that anymore. And county election boards can be replaced by state officials, which opens up county election boards to a lot of political nonsense. And so some of these changes could be good, but a lot of them are really concerning and alarming, especially considering how they are going to be applied. Immediately after the law changed, county election boards, they just started meddling with Fulton County and DeKalb County, which are the two biggest, not only Democratic but POC voting precincts, right? So these are definitely things that you should be aware of. I encourage you all to read more about. I'll make sure that this gets sent out so y'all can click on these links. And so I'm going to go pretty quickly to the next slides because I'm at time. I'm a little over time. If y'all want to, sweep me off the stage, just let me know, okay? So fair representation and redistricting. So this is. I talked a lot about voting, the changes to voting and ballot acts, voting at the polls, but also I want to just talk about redistricting because that also recently happened. So we've always been concerned about gerrymandering, which effectively shuts out voices of communities by lumping people into groups and minimizing their political representation. It's a major problem for pro-environmental voters, as I said, because most of the people who are impacted by this, everybody's impacted by it, but usually it's communities of color that are targeted and grouped in and tried and put into smaller, smaller districts, less districts. And of course, if this is the group of people that's most concerned about climate change, you are, minimizing the need to be responsive to this group of people when you gerrymander them into districts to limit their power. And so in December 2021, we had a special committee that looked at new maps. Most of these maps, all of these maps have been approved and signed by the governor. All of the maps more or less give Republicans a majority in the state legislature. So there's a majority in both houses, the House and the Senate, and that's likely going to be the case for the next 10 years until the next redistricting process comes along. And they also targeted congressional seats and local counties like Athens and Gwinnett. They went in and recomposed their county commission districts. Both of those places were becoming more progressive. And then you had the public service commission districts, which also got changed. And so we can go to the next slide. So just as an example of like how that played out, like this is Georgia's, sorry, there's probably more stuff on here than y'all really need to know, but there's partisan leaning. Before it was, we had 6 Democrats in Congress that represented Georgia and 8 Republicans for a total of 14 Congress people. We still have 14 Congress people, but now there are 4 strong Democratic seats, 1 Democratic seat that's now leaning, so it's less competitive or less Democratic than it was before, and there are now 9 strong Republican seats, right? So they gave more Republican seats, reduced the number of Democratic seats. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about gerrymandering, right? And so I was able to summarize that pretty quickly for the congressional seats. State legislative seats, I don't have that as clean yet, but I am going to say that there's only about 4 competitive Senate districts and about 20 competitive House districts, which means that depending on how those elections go, Republicans could not only have a majority in both chambers, but they could have a supermajority in both chambers, which would allow them to veto things that the governor does, to override things. And so it is certainly concern, but this isn't anything that we didn't see coming. You can go to the next slide. We were worried that this was going to happen, and we talked about getting some federal voting rights protections re-established. So Shelby County versus Holder was actually quite recent. I think it was a 2015 ruling, but in a 5-4 vote, the court struck down the formula at the heart of the Voting Rights Act. And so that it required certain states with a history of discrimination against minority voters to get their changes cleared by the federal government. So this is federal preclearance, if you hear that term. That's what people are talking about. So that was struck down. So Georgia was able to make all of these changes to the districts and to voting rights without having to get an additional level of oversight to those changes. Georgia was on that list of states with a history of discrimination that needed to have things double checked. So when we lost that protection, that's why there was all of these groups pushing for federal voting rights protection this past year, because we wanted additional protections from what we knew was coming at the state level. And so, unfortunately, none of those bills passed. There were several that got introduced, a couple of them that passed the House, but nothing made it through the Senate. And so we remain without federal voting rights protection. So this will continue to be a concern in Georgia. And I just want to say finally before I move on, it's just that, any one of these changes alone doesn't amount to voter suppression. When you add them all together, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? Every little change, every barrier put in place is 1, 2, 10, 20, 1,000 more voters that aren't going to make it to the polls. And that's human nature, right? It's like not just in voting, but corporations know that too. They make it as easy as possible for you to buy something because they know every barrier they put in place, you're less likely to make that transaction. So we can't pretend that we don't know this to be true when it comes to voting as well. And so I just want to be clear about that. I'll say briefly that this means that it's up to our states, us to try to fight for protection where we can. There's a lot of lawsuits happening, a lot of lawsuits about the districts changing that are working their way through courts right now. There are lawsuits about the changes to the voting rules that are working their way through courts right now. So I want you to know that no one's just sitting here and taking it lightly. There are people who are actively trying to, access those legal avenues to get some of this stuff overturned or adjusted. One of the ones I'm party to, I'm personally suing the Secretary of State of Georgia. It feels like a big deal to say that. Yes, yay for lawsuits. But yes, so I'm part of the Section 2 Voting Rights Act lawsuit because Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is still intact, and it says that you cannot dilute votes. And so there is, with the Public Service Commission, there are 5 Public Service Commission districts, but I don't know if y'all know this, but they are elected statewide. So no matter what the district is next to a Public Service Commissioner's name, you vote in that race. If it is on your ballot, you vote in that race, okay? Be really clear with your friends and family because people are very confused by this, okay? The districts, in that case, effectively mean nothing if they're elected statewide. But if you try to talk to a commissioner, will encourage you to talk to your commissioner for your district. But they should be responsive to everyone if they're statewide elections. And if they don't want to be responsive to everyone, then they need to be district-based elections, right? So we are very concerned that the current model, it dilutes votes, it particularly dilutes black votes, and the Public Service Commission District 3 is the case in point. That is mostly Atlanta, the metro area. If you look at elected officials in any other seat in that area, they're gonna be most likely Democratic. And so we've had a Republican leader in that seat for over 100 years representing the metro Atlanta area, right? But that's not who the people of metro Atlanta would want to elect, but that he is supported by a vote in other parts of the state, right? Other voters in other parts of the state keep him in that District 3 seat. So we're like, this isn't real representation. So that's really what we're trying to do is basically get some clarity with the Public Service Commission districts. Either they exist or they don't. Either they're district-based elections or they're just statewide with no districts. And so that is working its way through the court. The state tried to get it thrown out. They failed to get it thrown out. So we are continuing that case. And we have a trial in June. So in June, I'll be testifying in federal court. You know, no biggie. I'm not nervous or anything. But, you know, hopefully the end goal here is not that we're just trying to eject Republicans and get debt. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is representation. The goal is people being able to elect someone that is consistent with their values and their beliefs, that will fight for the things that they need to be fought for. That is the core objective of this lawsuit. And so, what can you do about all this? One is be an informed voter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And, you know, thank you for continuing to engage with GIPL and, you know, engaging in all the other spaces I'm sure you all are engaging in. It's important that we are doing what we can to understand what's happening with our elections, to understand where we live, to understand how and when we can vote. So please keep that up. Please go vote May 24th, primary election day, and then make a plan for the general election. You can also participate in the administration of elections. I'm pitching for people to become poll workers and poll watchers. And there are also nonpartisan groups who are assembling nonpartisan election poll watchers and hotline workers, right? There's a lot of ways to get involved in supporting elections. I want to uplift the poll workers piece, right? The poll workers are quitting like crazy because all the rules have changed. It's become really complicated. I mean, that's not the best pitch for you to do it, but there is, if you want to help, that help is needed there. And then you can volunteer with groups like GCV Education Fund or GIPL to help get out the vote. There'll be a lot of that activity happening throughout the rest of this year. And my biggest thing is bring 3 friends or family to the polls. Like right now, before you go, write down 3 people who you will make sure go vote. We often take for granted that our friends and family members are as politically active as we are. And I, in the last election cycle, got my mom and my sisters to vote, who my sister was like, I guess this is my first time voting, but don't tell anyone. And she's like 20 some odd, you know? And here I am going, oh my gosh, I'm telling everyone to vote. And I've overlooked my own sister. So please think about 3 friends or family that you can make sure get to the polls with you this election day. If you do nothing else, that is the most powerful thing you can do. Here's some key election deadlines. I'm not going to read through them all. I'm going to send this presentation out, but there's absentee ballot voting deadlines, early voting deadlines, voter registration deadlines, and Election Day, all in these next 2 slides here for y'all to look at. That's all I have. Thanks, y'all.
Hey, everybody. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to get some training on what you can do in your congregations. We're launching a faith, climate, justice voter campaign particular to people of faith and particular to congregations, so we're going to get some training on that. I'm encouraging everyone, why don't we do a little standing, do a little stretching, get an apple, get an orange, get a cup of coffee. When we come back in just a couple of minutes, while you all are doing that, I'm going to ask Tiffany Hartung, who is the Field Director for National Interfaith Power and Light. We're so lucky to have her here today, as well as Gayla Tillman, who is our Policy Associate at GIPL, to come up. They're going to do the presentation today on this. And so get yourself settled, stretch, get the blood moving, and then we're going to launch into this presentation.
Good here. Okay. In the box. Okay. And he'll put it up. Okay. He might have also needed a break. That's good.
All right, everybody, if you want to start making your way to your tables and take a seat, we're going to get started on the Faith, Climate, Justice voter campaign.
Hi, everyone. I think we're gonna get started as you all are still settling back in and got some coffee and more snacks. I'm Tiffany Hartung with Interfaith Power and Light National, and I'm gonna be talking about our Faith, Climate, Justice voter campaign this year. And I have my colleague Gayla Tillman here, who is, as you all probably know, Gayla is your lead here in Georgia for the Faith, Climate, Justice voter campaign. Yay. There we go. I understand it's a hard click. I think I got it. Nope. Uh-oh. Sorry. Thanks. All right, so we just heard this morning what's at stake this year, and you all know it's a lot. The same powerful interests who are polluting our air and water are also trying to undermine our right to vote and our democracy. We need to ensure that everyone can participate in our democracy, and our faith communities have a big role, an important role to play in ensuring a healthy democracy. We also have watched climate action not move at the federal level in the last year, and it's important that we elect leaders to Congress who have the moral courage to act on climate. All right, I think I got the clicker. I think I got it figured out. Down. Hold it, point it down further. Okay. Thanks. This is a little loud. So that's all that say. That's why IPL National and GIPL are working to increase faith voter turnout this year, as Cody mentioned. We're working to to turn out faith voters and inspire them to vote the values of climate justice. Our values call us to ensure that everyone is cared for and that we're good stewards of our sacred earth. Millions of Americans of faith care about climate change and justice, but too many of them are unlikely to vote. And we know that if we connect those voters with their values and then help them turn out to vote, that they will vote and we can make a difference. But we need all of your congregations to get involved and help us do this year. Okay, thanks. So some of you might recall IPL's 2020 Faith Climate Justice voter campaign. Anyone? maybe a little bit, remember? To recap, it was really our first civic engagement campaign at such scale. IPL congregations and faith communities and volunteers around the country helped mobilize faith voters to get out and vote their values. We collected voter pledges, shared a faithful voter reflection guide, and texted faith voters. All right, sorry guys, got it. We also in 2020, we crafted an experiment to measure the impact of this work and learn from that work. Our outreach included some voter outreach best practices of the voter pledge. There's pledge postcards that are out on the table there that Gayla probably directed you to when you came in. We had those pledges. We shared our voter discussion guide, and we asked folks to get 3 friends to pledge to vote, what Briante was suggesting, which is an effective best practice in voter turnout. And then we also reminded them to vote. And volunteers texted over 230,000 faith voters. The voter activation network that Briante was talking about with the climate alarmed folks, we pulled a list of those folks, and then also added in layered in a criteria for people who are religious. And so we had people of faith reaching out to voters of faith about encouraging them to vote and talking about climate justice. Here's some of the results of that. The experiment measured the impact of that program, and we did just an experiment on a small part of our outreach, and it showed that our program increased voter turnout by 1.7 percentage points. So doesn't feel like a lot, but in terms of like this type of work, that's 3 times more than the standard for texting voters. So that suggests that over 1,400 additional people voted because of our efforts. And so we've taken those lessons from last year, or 2020 rather, and applying them to this year's campaign. As you know, it has already been talked about a lot, this year's election is going to be very important, and it's very much about the values that we all care about. And we want to express our values of ensuring a livable planet for future generations and that all people are cared for. And so this year we're focusing on this campaign is focused on we're working with affiliates in Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to get out the faith vote. And so we've created a congregation captain structure that I'll talk about in a moment that would love to have you all participate and sign up in and join with. And we'll be reaching out to voters of faith by text again this year, and so would love your help in that as well. Could I get your help in playing this video? We have a quick message from I guess this fella doesn't need any introduction here. It won't play? Oh, okay. There's a link to the YouTube video in the comments on the slide deck. Well, we can always come back and definitely send this out in the follow-up materials. Yeah, okay. We'll play it at the end, or maybe during lunch. So yeah, it's a message from our board chair, Reverend Durley, and Georgian, who I think you all know about the campaign. We'll play that later. Thank you. So those of you here, raise your hand if your congregation is talking about elections this year. Okay, a few of you. Is your congregation planning to engage in the election at all in a nonpartisan way, of course? Got a couple? That's great. How are you all thinking about doing that? What have you talked about so far? Postcards, great. I think there's a hand over here. That's great. Yeah, and love that working with other congregations and within the faith community. That's fantastic. I love to see. I'll keep an eye out for that. So those are great examples. As I mentioned, we have this congregation captain structure that we have, and there's a link in the blue at the bottom that's probably pretty small font for some of you in the back, but again, it'll go out. But I encourage you to go to that link and sign up, and this is how you can sign up to get information. We have a toolkit for your congregations that includes a menu of activities that you can do, It allows you to serve as sort of a liaison between the campaign and GIPL's campaign and your congregation, and bring these activities back to your congregation to incorporate. And so if you sign up, you'll get emailed a toolkit, and you'll also get invitations to monthly trainings, newsletters, and other resources that you can utilize in your congregation or tailor to your community and congregation. And you'll be hearing from my friend Gayla here as well. So here's a list of some of those activities, that sort of menu of activities that are in the toolkit. And once you signed up, you'll get emailed this. And here's a number of the things. So collecting the voter pledges, the postcards that were mentioned, the working with other congregations, and doing that important voter education with the video. That's a great way to do it. Also, we have having sermons on the importance of voting and voting on climate justice. And we'll have resources to support you all in doing all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Gayla here to talk a little bit about GIPL's work in Georgia.
Good. Is it still morning? Is it still good morning? Yeah, it's still morning. All right, y'all. Good morning, y'all. For folks who don't know me, my name is Gayla Tellman. I'm the Policy Associate for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. So yes, I am over voting rights and all these great things, but also all over the policy. So in terms of what Briante was just saying about barriers to the ballot, that's also why we are called to this work. We're called to this work because we are faith, climate justice voters, but also because we believe the right to vote is sacred, because we believe all Georgians should have a right to cast their ballot. And so basically, Briante talked a lot about a lot of this, but I did want to go over like a couple things, just because there are some things that like I want to provide context to. For example, with like less drop boxes and things like that. If you're somebody with a disability or someone that needs assistance with like getting your ballot to like being able to cast your ballot, there are limits to who can drop off your absentee ballot. It would have to be someone, I believe it's your someone in your immediate family, like that person would have to be your caretaker. Like it can't just be like, someone that volunteers to drop off your ballot. And also in terms of like less days for voter registration and requesting your absentee ballot. Like in previous years, it was 180 days. You could apply for an absentee ballot and, you had 180 days, but that has been significantly cut, to make sure that the process for requesting absentee ballots is streamlined, though that can be a bit harmful for some folks who are overseas, people who work, people who may be less familiar with the process, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing I want to talk about is no line warming. And I want to talk about that because a lot of news outlets were talking about like how you can't give out water and things like that. Though I think it's worth, mentioning the fact that in general, you can't give out gifts. So for example, if you're someone with a disability and you need a chair to sit down in line, someone would not be able to give you that chair. If you have children, if you brought your children to the polls and someone's like, hey, here's a coloring book, so that way you can keep your children company as you cast your ballot, as you participate in our democracy, they would not be able to do that. So I think it's really important that when we're talking about these voter restrictions, that we provide context that Georgia voters look like so many different things, whether that be race, age, disability status, who you bring to the polls. There's so many different ways that people show up to the ballot box. And what we should be advocating for is for more people to show up to the ballot box and less restrictions so that way they can cast their ballot to elect a candidate of their choice or candidates of their choice. And so, like what's been stated earlier, what can you do about it? You can volunteer to be an election protection volunteer, be a poll worker, and of course, become a congregation captain. I would be remiss to talk about talking about being a congregation captain if I didn't talk about why I specifically feel called to this campaign. I feel specifically called to this campaign because once you hear someone struggling to breathe after they're having an asthma attack, you don't forget that sound. And you don't forget the silence of elected officials who won't do something on climate action. And also, when I'm thinking about hurricanes, when I think about people without power, when I think about people who have had their entire life work flooded away, and elected officials who ignore them or don't pay attention to them or say like, we'll get to the clean energy eventually, I see that as a failure. And that's why I specifically feel called to this campaign, because me as a person of faith, I cannot pray, I cannot look to God for an answer if I am not actively participating in the solution. I have to practice what I preach. I have to step into mercy, into justice, because that is how I show up, and that's how I don't go running and screaming away from the Capitol, because I use my faith as a guiding light. I use my faith as a way to feel like I am connected to something better, to something, larger than me. I just wanted to basically bring up why I specifically feel called to this campaign. And then there's a next slide. Do I hit the button? Okay, thank you. So I say all of this. This was talked about a little bit, but I wanted to talk about like what we can provide in terms of like education and things like that. For one thing, a lot of y'all have met me before, but feel free to invite me to your congregation. I can give a presentation. I can talk about the intersection of voting rights and the environment in a way, I can put up a cute presentation. I can give you some statistics. I can make it look great, Feel free to invite me. And then also I wanted to bring up the fact that there's no such thing as too entry level. You could be 47, 57, 67. If this is your first time voting, we want to make sure that it is accessible for you. If this is your first time helping people register to vote, if this is your first souls to the polls, whatever it is, we want to make sure that it's accessible for you, because it should be. And then and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that Georgia is a hot topic. There's a lot happening here in this state, whether it be the governor's race, the senator's race, the IRP, the Public Service Commission. It's a lot to keep track of. So our job here at GIPL, we want to make sure that you don't get lost in the haze of all of it. And so, like I was saying earlier, in terms of action, we can do something. We do not have to stay in a doom cycle. We do not have to stay in our distress. There is something we can actively do to make sure that our congregations, people who are in alignment with our morals, are activated to do something for a better climate. So if anything, I have up there a couple regions that we're focusing on, because we are a statewide organization. So if you got a cousin, if you got a family member, if you got some homies in different parts of the state, also feel free to, reach out to them and say hey, I know this organization who's down to help present materials and things like that, because here in this great state of Georgia, we have, the history of John Lewis, we have Martin Luther King, we have Joseph Lowery, we have Abernathy, we have this long history of incredible people fighting for faith and justice, and we have to make sure that climate doesn't get lost, because our earth is worth fighting for. And so up there's a couple regions we're focusing on, like South Georgia, Middle Georgia. If you got some cousins in Albany, let us know. So my card is out on the table by the registration table. Also, there's these Become a Faith Climate Justice Voter sheets that should be on your table. And I also just welcome any and all questions because honestly, Senate Bill 202 caused a lot of confusion in terms of absentee voting, line warming, all these things. And we want to make sure that y'all have the tools to activate as a faith climate justice voter. And I encourage y'all to pledge to be a faith climate justice voter for the reasons that I've stated. And yeah, I think I pass it back to you. Yeah. What's the next slide? Yeah, that's you. That's all you.
So to talk about the voter registration, this is a big priority for IPL this year. We have a partner that has set up this voter registration portal for us, and we're really trying to make sure that, as was talked about earlier, I imagine that most of you are probably registered to vote, but we want to make sure that you are ensuring that your entire faith communities are registered and ready to vote, and that if helping folks check this registration, we have an activity. So this flyer on your table, take out your phone and scan the QR code, and I'm going to walk you through our process just so you're probably registered, but just so you can see what it looks like. This tool also allows you to check your registration. So if you might have moved and forgot to update your voter registration, or in the case where your voter registration was purged and you didn't know it, this is why we want folks who say maybe they know they're registered, but we want them to also encourage them to check it as well, double check. So yeah, so if you folks know GL knows to take out your phone and you can take a picture, like get the camera feature over this and look at. I see a few folks doing it. And it pulls up, it should take you to a website that looks like this. And then you enter your information. This might take a few minutes here. Is it working for folks? I see people typing, okay. So just so you can double check your registration's current and good, but also so as you're working with folks in your communities, you understand what this process looks like. So what this is once you've confirmed your registration's up to date, or if it's not, it will help you update it through connecting you to the Georgia website. And then it will also, once you've done this and you've put your email in or choosing to put your cell phone number in, they will text you or email you closer to the election with tips on how to it's time to vote, here's how to vote, here's where to make sure, like all of those details. So that is all automated. So the more that we're driving folks to use this website and fill out their information, the more that they'll be automatically getting those reminders and those voter turnout best practices that we know work, and helping provide them the information that, as I understand, is becoming increasingly confusing in Georgia, thanks to the State House, and more complicated. All right, so I'll move us along. I think we're going to skip on questions here because we're running a little short on time, but wanted to ask you all in your tables to take a couple of minutes to talk about this conversation, or talk amongst yourselves on this question. What campaign activities related to the voter campaign can you envision doing in your congregation? What could be a fit in your faith community for engaging on this issue? So I think we'll probably, I don't see Cody or Hannah. How are we doing on time? They're both out dealing with lunch. So let's take 5 minutes to talk, and then I think we break for lunch after that. So at 11:20, so go to talk amongst yourselves about and reflect on this question until 11:20, and then I'll turn it over to Cody, who I think will then send us to lunch.
Check, check. Hey, everybody. Have you solved it? Did you figure it out? Is it fixed? Great. Before we dismiss you to lunch, we're going to give a blessing in a second, but want to play this video for you that we didn't get to see, so we'll do that, and then I'll come back up here, and then we can feast.
This is the Faith in Action Climate Week, leading up to Earth Day of April the 22nd. We understand the concept of prayer. All faiths have a way to speak to the higher being, to the higher authority, to the deity. And when we speak to God in our own different faith traditions, God hears. And we need to be speaking to God and talking with God and praying to God now more than ever before, because we're deliberately destroying a perfectly balanced ecological world that He loaned to us to share. Birds and bees and animals and trees and air and water. And we are the stewards. We're to take care of this creation. One of the ways that we need to do it is certainly to talk with the Creator, the God that made it all possible, that you and I can have breath and life and exercise and have an enjoyable time. So I'd like you to join with me as we pray for the environment, as we pray for the earth, as we pray for each other. In the Christian tradition, prayer solves many things, and all the other faiths understand this. So as I pray in the Christian tradition, I pray that all of you will join with us and understand that the power of prayer. Eternal and almighty, divine, righteous God, we come before your throne with bowed heads and humbled hearts. We come, Almighty God, first of all, to apologize what we've done, knowingly and unknowingly. We've polluted the seas, we've polluted the air, we've put plastic into the ocean. We've destroyed the sea life. God, we've even discolored the corals that you gave us that brought oxygen. Right now, God, we come to apologize for that. We come, God, to ask that you would forgive us and give us a new sense of guidance, a new sense of direction, a way in which we should honor you and honor the planet and honor the environment. God, we come now to ask you to touch the lives of the politicians and the business person, the energy and the oil companies, that they would understand that they are a part of your divine order. God, we ask that each person under the sound of my voice would take his or her position of responsibility to caring for the earth at a very serious level. God, dip us down into your well of understanding and lift us up and dry us into your compassion to go forth. Allow us to vote and speak and talk and pray and make a difference. We can only make a difference, God, when we work together, when we care for one another, when we care for the earth, when we care for this generation as well as the generation. God, we take this prayer right now. We put it at the foot of your altar, that you might hear our plea, that you might be concerned about our concern, that you might know, God, that we are your willing hands and feet to make a difference. Stay with us, and we will not disappoint you ever again. Give us the power, the strength that we will not bend nor back up, but we will go forth with mercy and grace and diligence. Thank you, God, for hearing our prayer. Thank you, God, for encouraging us. Thank you, God, for leading us. Thank you, God, for giving us the strength and the internal tenacity to speak truth to power and bring forth the results of a fair and just society in an environment that is equal and justice for all. In the name of all of the great prophets, we do pray. Amen.
We're so grateful for that video from Reverend Durley. And you think to yourself, a video is really nice, but what if you had the man in person? And we're lucky enough today to have Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley with us here in person. I'm going to ask him to come up and give us a blessing for lunch. And after Reverend Durley is done, then please proceed back here. We have a selection of almost every sandwich imaginable. We have vegetarian options. We have salad. We have gluten-free veggie chili. So truly, feast and have a nice time after this, and thank y'all.
Wow. I feel like the man that wrote the La Sadducee. Thank you so much. I had no idea that I would be here. I was speaking with my good friend and my former student, Daniel Blackman, earlier this morning, and I said, I've got to go out because Cody Norred has done so much, and GIPL is doing so much not only here in the state of Georgia, and it's so important. You're looking at a person now who never thought that he'd be speaking about climate change and global warming and polar bears that couldn't get to the next glacier. I had no idea. I'm from the civil and human rights movement. Years ago, I started with a little 20-year-old boy. I was 18, he was 20, just a kid. We were both children. His name was John Lewis. And then C.T. Vivian and Martin and Andy and all of us in 1960. So all of you with that white hair, I would have it too. I just shaved mine off. On Tuesday, I'll be 80 years old. 80 years old. And as we say, and I don't feel no way tired. We've got a battle ahead of us, and we will not be defeated. We will not back up. We will not bend, and we will not break. We will protect God's planet, but more important, the next generation. No, this generation. So I applaud you. Let me congratulate GIPL and what you're doing here in Georgia. You never know in a Kairos moment, a moment like this, what God is doing to each one of us. You thought it not robbery to get up on a Saturday, the day before Mother's Day, but this is Mother Earth's Day, the day before Mother's Day for people. Mother Earth and Mother People. I never thought about that until just now. So as we come together to listen, to learn, but more importantly, and as I've said it to Daniel and to Cordy and Sally and Susan Hendershot and Susan and all of us, the thing that we've got to be excited about and what keeps me going is this. Many of you have been in this with river keepers and other Chattanooga river keepers for many years. What I've found that we've really got to inject now into our movement, watch this word, enthusiasm. I can't stand a dull group of people. I can't stand a dull movement. I can't stand somebody that just says the same thing every day. You've got to have that fire. That's the only way that we can do this. So as we get out there, I heard the speaker before talk about voting, talk about being out there. That's what enthusiasm, it means in theos, in God. And when you're in God, you ought to be excited about something. You ought to tell somebody as we connect here. So many of us in small groups come together, but when our small groups come together, we're like bricks that will build a wall that will determine where we go from this point on. We treat the environment like a rental car. This is not a rental car. So let me just thank all of you as we go to God and pray for I had no idea this video would be shown. I came and I said, who is that guy up there? He looks pretty good. And so we want to pray and thank God not only for the food, but certainly for this opportunity. But more importantly, what I want you to do, when you leave this place, when you see what GIPL has prepared, touch somebody. The strength of any movement is an interconnectedness above color, above race, above gender, above sexual preferences, above denomination and our faith, to reach out and touch somebody, to make a difference. And then once we get that touching going, that's what builds the movement, because each one of you are leaders, and each leader has an ability to touch somebody. And that's what we've got to do, not just keep it to ourselves. When you find a good restaurant, you get home and say, I had a good meal yesterday. Where did you find it? So when you leave this place, I was with a great organization today, the Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. What did you all talk about? Click, click, click. And soon it's like a wildfire. Let's put out the wildfires that are destroying the planet, but let's start wildfires in our life. Let's start wildfires in our heart. Let's start wildfires in our voice. Let's start wildfires in our mind. Let's start wildfires for the environment. Somebody ought to say amen, and let's get busy. Eternal and almighty, divine, righteous God, we thank you for this moment. We thank you for this time. We thank you for these people. We thank you for your infusing your enthusiasm into each one of us. God, we thank you for firing us up. God, we thank you for when we leave this place, but never from your presence, that we will go forth and speak truth to power, that we will always let those who are in our way say, step aside, we're coming forth. Remember this, we're on the winning team. We're on the winning team, and the winning team means that our minds and our hearts are focused. We will not bend, we will not back up, nor will we bow, because we know what we're doing is divinely unctioned and inspired by the holy divine power of an almighty God who loaned us this planet. We're taking it back. We're standing up against you powers and petroleum companies, and we will do what you've called us to do. God, thank you for the food that will strengthen our bodies and strengthen our minds so that we can be continual warriors for the environment. And we ask it all in the powerful name of every saint, every prophet, but in our tradition, in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. And all those that are ready to march and fight and save this planet, say amen. Amen. Oh, I can't hear you. Amen. The fire department down the street can't hear you. Amen. Let Biden hear you. Amen. God bless.
All right, everybody. Thank y'all so much. You're welcome to begin making your way back here. You'll see the setup. We've got plates and bowls and cups and all the things. Please do use the hand sanitizer. What we're going to do is we're going to move through the line, get your food, and once you're settled, we're going to invite Daniel Blackman, who is here with us now, the U.S. EPA Regional Administrator for Region 4. He's going to give some remarks, and then we're going to do the first ever in-person Coffee and Something Stronger talkback session. We'll do an interview with Daniel Blackman, and we'll take some questions from the audience. So please move and get your food, and we'll start again here in a little bit. All right, everybody. I hope that you are enjoying the bounty. As you can see, I'm also much like Juan. I come from a Baptist tradition, so we will not be going hungry in this space. It's not something that we believe in. So there's plenty of food. Please feel free to help yourself to as much as you want. Next, what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce our very special guest, the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Region 4 Administrator, the right Sir Daniel Blackman, a big fan of all the work that we're doing here, someone who's been an environmental justice champion for a long time, and someone who's not only interested in the conservation work charged by the agency, but in truly doing right by communities and doing justice. And so I'm going to invite him up. He's going to give some remarks, and then we're going to sit down over here and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. So if you feel so moved to orient yourselves over on this side of the room, there are 3 tables here that I would invite you to. But without further ado, Administrator Daniel Blackman.
So I am every bit of 5'6", and it feels really good to have a podium that I don't have to make too many adjustments on. First of all, good morning. That was, we just started eating good morning. I'm gonna say it again, good morning. First of all, I wanna say thank you to my friend, mentor, someone that I hold very near and dear to my heart, Reverend Gerald Durley, who you all heard from earlier. Reverend Durley is someone that has opened so many doors in my life, and as a firm believer in my faith, the scripture tells us in Revelations, it says, "Behold, I've opened a door for you that no man can shut." And there has been tremendous doors opened for me in my career that has allowed me to get to this point. But I wanted to first say thank you to all of you for the work that you're doing, and it is very, very comfortable to be what I would consider home. Region 4, for those of you that don't know, encompasses 8 states in the southeastern United States, which includes Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Tennessee. We also represent 6 federally recognized tribes, and those communities are just as important for us in our region for what we do. And also Region 4 houses 67 million people. So on behalf of the Environmental Protection Agency, the President and Administrator Michael Regan out of Washington, I bring you greetings. I thank you. And GIPL, you guys are doing a heck of a job. So give yourselves a round of applause. And I'll open with my remarks. So instead of encouragement, I came with a challenge. My challenge to each and every one of you is to look around and ask yourself a very simple question. And that question is, are you comfortable, are you content with how far you've helped this organization to come? Have you thought about succession planning and transforming this room into what at the core and the essence of who all of us are? Have you done enough to put this organization in a position to take the community into the future? My mother and father, my father has since passed on. He served as United States Army Ranger. If there are any veterans in this room, thank you for your service. And any family members of veterans, thank you for your service as well. My mother and father are immigrants from Barbados. My grandfather served as a diplomat to the United Nations. And there's a quote, a part of the Sustainable Goals, that says that we are well able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. There's also a quote that I like to say a lot to remind all of us who are parents and grandparents or that love the children that are in our community, which reminds us of a Native American proverb resemblant of the 6 federally recognized tribes in Region 4 that says, "We do not inherit the planet from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." And my challenge to you today is, what planet are we passing on to our children? But also, what movement are we passing on to our children? In my capacity as a regional administrator, my job is to really take the agenda and the policy agenda of the president and to work with headquarters out of DC. Region 4 has 10 regions in the US. Region 4 is the largest of those with the most states, but also a tremendous amount of diversity. Within Region 4, there's 69 historically black colleges. I myself am a product of one, along with my former dean, but also teacher, Reverend Durley. And for you all that don't know, many of us know him in the capacity of just being a great orator and a great minister of the word. But at the end of the day, that man has been retired for a long time. And I've come to learn very quickly that retirement really just means a reset for a lot of folks. And while Dr. Durley should have long enjoyed his rest, the one thing that I appreciate, which is going to lead me into what I really want to share on the challenge side with you, is it's very easy for us to be in a position or to have a title or to represent an organization and to do things that are quote unquote safe. We in this moment may very well see and experience the last generation that can address and eradicate poverty, the first generation that can address and eradicate poverty, but the last generation that can really challenge, take on, and resolve the climate crisis. So the challenge that we all face today, for all of you that found it important to wake up on a Saturday morning, and not just any Saturday morning, but Mother's Day weekend. So to all the mothers, happy Mother's Day to you, and I really appreciate it. You should clap when you say Happy Mother's Day. So. But I found it very interesting when the Reverend made that parallel between Mother Earth and the community and the people and the natural environment. Where we stand today as a society and where EPA is really at an interesting intersection. And that intersection is, on the one hand, the federal government having access to over $1 trillion for what's called the bipartisan infrastructure law, and an initiative within that law that was written by Congress called Justice 40. And Justice 40 was written to really establish an opportunity for the most underserved and left out communities to quote unquote be at the table and not on the menu. Because too often, whether it is in Appalachia or rural Georgia or anywhere in the rural South, poverty has had an overwhelming impact on the way in which we can not only discuss climate, but how we can transform communities. In the state of Georgia alone, 2.1 million people live at or below poverty. And when we talk about the climate crisis, without including the challenges and the barriers that come along with poverty, unfortunately, too many zip codes in the 159 counties in the state of Georgia, the children's futures are, but should not be based on their parents' income. And a parent's income should never determine their child's outcome. And our responsibility and role in this moment in time is to fundamentally understand that this is not a new conversation, but it's a necessary conversation. In 1968, Dr. King was assassinated, and 61 days later, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. And the one thing that they had, which was strikingly in common, was that at the time of their deaths, they both were highly involved with transforming the American society based on addressing the issue of poverty. Dr. King with the Poor People's Campaign, and Bobby Kennedy with his tour in Appalachia, and ultimately in his travels back to California, taking a train through 10 of the poorest communities in the United States. Now, it's really easy for me to talk about water and to talk about clean air and to talk about all these things, but as Reverend Durley mentioned earlier, the genesis of most people's entry point into climate change and environmental justice is not polar ice caps melting with a polar bear standing on a single piece of ice. It's their light bills being able to come on. It's their children suffering with asthma 7 to 10 times the national average. And that's the unfortunate truth for too many young people in our society, but predominantly in black and brown communities. Far before George Floyd was caught on camera saying his last words, "I can't breathe," millions of children across the United States couldn't breathe because of their struggle with asthma. So during this Asthma Awareness Month, I want to recognize the fact that there is so much more work that we have to do and that we have to commit to. We're privileged to be able to sit in this room on a Saturday morning. When we think of the ability and the opportunity for electric vehicles and EV charging stations. That's great, but so is public transportation. And the ability for folks that don't have the means to invest into an electric vehicle do have the means to have utility bills and power that's reliable, that's safe, that's clean, that offers an opportunity for their children to compete and ultimately have a ladder out of poverty. When I think of the position I'm in, the first thing that came to mind when I was appointed by the president in November was that I'm on the clock, which is a good thing because when you know you're on the clock, in other words, I have a window of either 3 years or by good fortune, if the president is privileged enough to be reelected by the American people, then I'll have a total of 7 years to serve in this capacity. So my priorities have somewhat changed, and I want to give you 3 examples, and I want to close my statements out so that we can have more of a conversation. The first example is a trip we took the weekend of Selma with the administrator, Mr. Michael Regan, who's also an alum of a historically black college in North Carolina, A&T. We went to Lowndes County, Alabama. And in Lowndes County, Alabama, we witnessed a young boy named Malachi who couldn't be more than 7 years old. And he was playing outside, ladies and gentlemen, with rain boots on. And for the life of me, I didn't understand it. As the father of 3 boys and a daughter, it really struck me to understand why this young man could not by choice, because you know some of our kids are interesting and they like to just do weird things in and out of season. But Malachi was wearing his boots because of contamination due to septic tanks overflowing and being disrupted, waste during flooded because sewage systems weren't maintained up to date or in place. And he now runs the threat, like many of the children throughout the state of Alabama, for hookworm infection and parasitic infection. So they can't go outside to play, not by choice without wearing those rain boots, but because it is a way of life that has been normalized. And that's what I wanted to bring to you all's attention today. Urban communities and rural communities, when we say underserved, we don't just mean black and brown communities. Underserved means underserved. And it's our responsibility to take the tremendous burden to understand that the story of Malachi and so many other folks who have normalized abnormal situations and conditions, to remind ourselves every day that when we leave this place and we celebrate Mother's Day, to not forget that there are mothers all over this state and all over our country and all over the world, quite frankly, that don't get to hear these messages. And it's easy for me to speak and to have this conversation, Cody, and to really stand before you and take my seat, and I go home as well. But we have to learn from each other. And we have to understand that the time that we're in is a situation where, according to Scripture, says, to whom much is given, much is required. Regardless of your faith, your background, your religion, your belief, it's incumbent upon all of us to take this moment and to understand that we have a responsibility not tomorrow, but today. The second example I wanted to give you was my recent travels throughout the region. I went to New Orleans, Louisiana, and I spoke to 300 attendees of an HBCU, Historically Black College Summit on Climate. It's very important for me to share my next words with you, but I want to give you something to think about before I give you the example. And it's more of a question. Do you look at society through a glass window, or do you look at society through the mirror? And I don't want you to answer that. I want you to think of the analogy that I'm making. Do you look at society through a window, being able to observe what's happening and being judgmental? Or do you look at yourself in the mirror every day and ask, what is your part? What is your role? What is your capacity to be able to help have an impact on this world? That's what interfaith responsibility is supposed to be. One of the most transformative things that I've ever been a part of was traveling to the Vatican in 2015 ahead of the Paris Climate Accords to witness the Pope give the encyclical on climate change. And it was the first time that I had seen nations come together at least witness it. We read about things, we see them. But in 2015, I had a chance to be invited as one of 3 quote-unquote emerging leaders from the United States, 77 total attendees from multiple countries, including Australia, the continent of Africa, South America, the Fiji Islands, the Caribbean. And it was very important for me to witness this because too often in the United States, we see ourselves as our challenges and our issues, but we don't always think about the global impact we have when it comes to plastics and waste recycling, chemicals, and these different things that we contribute to every day or at least witness, and the responsibility and role we have to not just say we're leaders on paper, but to make decisions and to take actions each and every day, not just through voting, but through holding those who are elected officials, our representatives, but also our leaders extremely and overwhelmingly accountable for the decisions that will take us into the future. The third thing is we've witnessed at EPA and throughout society what was told to as me. So when I give you this statement, don't look at me sideways. I'm telling you how it was told to me. But the EPA and other agencies is witnessing what's called the silver tsunami, which means we are losing an immense amount of leadership that have served agencies and organizations for 20 and 30 and 40 years. So everybody say this with me, succession planning. No, don't whisper it, say succession planning. If we don't put things in place now, what do we think will happen to all the work that we've contributed to and lost sleep over and had time away from our family for? In December of this last year, 10 days into my service at EPA, a tornado hit Kentucky, and I had to immediately go from what I would consider a honeymoon period, Cody, into a, you need to make sure you know what you have committed your life and your family to. And within 10 more days, I had 18 retirements from EPA. We have to replace those irreplaceable people that contributed decades of their life to an agency, one of which is sitting right here to my right, which I appreciate your service, sir. But for me, I want to thank you all for recognizing the fact that succession planning doesn't mean that we are wanting to just replace you and remove you. It means who have you groomed, who have you taught, who have you mentored, who have you given the resources to be a better version of who they are. I did not become a regional administrator because I went to college for environmental justice and got a degree in environmental science and engineering and then met someone that gave me an opportunity or a job straight out the box. It didn't happen like that for me. My journey began after Hurricane Katrina, because no one ever taught me about global warming or climate change. And when I went to New Orleans, Louisiana, and saw bodies floating in the water, and I saw mothers with children that had been wearing diapers for 2 and 3 and 4 days, and somebody said, well, the levees broke. And EPA and FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, and I said, hold up, what are those? And I'm not ashamed to say it. Ignorance isn't a bad word. Ignorance just means that we failed to have the ability and understanding to know something that will then allow us to understand the role in which we play to go in that direction, to be a part of the change and the impact that is necessary. And after Hurricane Katrina, I made my mind up that day that no longer would black and brown people only be seen as climate refugees. But I wanted to make sure that if there were going to be conversations held, we were able to have those conversations from a point of leadership and not as victims. So I challenge you all in your succession planning to think long and hard about the young people you recruit, the diversity you recruit, not just the diversity in color, but in young women whose voices have time and time again been replaced, overspoken. There's another proverb that reminds us to listen, to understand, and not to respond. And we have to stop talking over each other and understand where we are and what we can do. And I'll close with what we hope to focus on within EPA. Because as I reminded you earlier, I'm on the clock. So the first thing that I'm going to commit myself to is building the bench and building a resilient EPA that is strong enough to weather the storm of any political election or any president. What I would like to do is build an EPA in this region that is so strong and so resilient that regardless of a presidential administration, science is still respected. enforcement still happens. And communities not only have voices that stand up for them, but they have people that are competent enough to understand that this long walk towards justice is a marathon and not a sprint. It's not something we're going to fix overnight. But I believe if we recruit people now that can make a career out of EPA, then that will take us 5, 10, and 20 years into the future. And that's exactly what our agency, our government, our democracy, but also our society needs. The second thing is we want to make sure within EPA that environmental justice and climate change becomes just as synonymous as the conversations people have around voting rights and criminal justice reform. Because we have a friendly president in President Biden and Vice President Harris who have committed themselves to environmental justice and climate change, we don't know what another administration will or will not commit to. So it's our responsibility to do a simple word that begins with the letter E, which is to educate, and another word, to inform, to make sure that communities that have not been in this room, that don't understand the science or the language that too often speaks over them and not to them, gives them the opportunity to know what their role is on the ground in their communities and in their neighborhoods so that we don't become their excuse. And then lastly, our commitment to the faith-based communities and grassroots organizations to show your role in the commitments we'll make. The bipartisan infrastructure law, which was passed recently, Cody, gives us a unique opportunity. And before I even go into that, I mentioned that silver tsunami. We get to hire upwards of 125 people within EPA, which I'm very, very proud of, knowing that we can recruit from some of our best institutions and some of those students and young people that should be in these rooms. We get to pull from those talent pools and bring them into our agency. But to understand fundamentally where we are and the role that we have to play going into the future is a commitment that we can't shy away from. And I would hope that in educating and informing, we can bring more people to the table that want to have conversations with us. It's almost like telling somebody that comes from an impoverished background to go to the doctor. A lot of times it's not just that they can't afford to go to the doctor, it's that they're afraid. And they feel that the more they don't know, the more it won't harm them. And we have to change that narrative through education to let people know that not talking about environmental justice or not talking about climate change doesn't make it go away. And that if we begin to let them know that it's a conversation we can have, a conversation we're committed to, and also a conversation that is necessary for us as a society to live and to thrive and to go beyond the time that we're in now, it's a conversation and it's a responsibility that we all share. So on behalf of the President and of Administrator Regan, our region, and my colleague Brandy Jenkins, who's traveled with me today, we want to thank you for the work that you're doing. We want to thank you for your commitment to your faith, to your community, to your country, but also to humankind. Thank you so much.
Make sure we're good here. Great.
Hello? That's my Barry White voice.
Just a little relaxing setting, a little change of pace. Thank you again so much for being here, and want to just have a little bit of community conversation. I've got a couple of questions I'm going to ask, but for those of you who are listening, think about some questions that you might have, because we're going to turn to the audience here in a little bit. But you mentioned your experience kind of seeing the damage that Katrina had caused as kind of one of the moments that catalyzed you moving towards this work. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about what got you into doing this work, and environmental justice in particularly. You've been doing environmental work and work on clean energy for a while before accepting this. So I want to give you the opportunity to say a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I mentioned in 2005, I witnessed Hurricane Katrina, and like the rest of the world, I really wanted to understand, what we can do to prevent that from happening again. So I got involved. I joined organizations locally, and I'll be honest. It was a little intimidating because, if I can be honest, the rooms were older and they were very white, and I just, it wasn't very welcoming in a lot of ways. Not because I was uncomfortable, but because I just didn't understand why there weren't more black and brown folks in these rooms. And Reverend Durley and Reverend C.T. Vivian and certain people were the first folks that I saw, right? So what I did after 2005 is I stayed engaged and involved in the civil rights community. I was doing a lot of work, and in 2007, I was introduced to President Obama. And he was a senator at the time, and we worked really hard to commit to what we thought would be a really great vision for our country. When President Obama was elected, I had the chance and the privilege to serve on 3 White House initiatives. 2 of them were environmental centric. One was Every Kid in a Park, and the other initiative was My Brother's Keeper. And so those 2 initiatives gave me an opportunity to work with it. And over time, Cody, what happened with me was I basically saw so many doors open from being in those rooms that came off as intimidating to me. So meeting the Laura Seidel's of the world and the Dr. Bullards and the Reverend Durleys, those opened doors for me to go to the Okefenokee Swamp, and it opened doors for me to go to the Everglades, and it opened doors for me to go to Red Top Mountain, which was the first park in the state of Georgia that black people can go to camp, because during segregation, black folks in the state of Georgia and other southeastern states were not allowed to go to state parks. So we had an initiative where we went with 2 corporate groups. We took about 30 or 40 people of color to to camp out. That was interesting. It was my first time putting up my tent myself and camping. And when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and realized I had to go find somewhere, it made me question my judgment. But for the next couple of years, it just gave me an opportunity to get out of my comfort zone. And that led to my interest in utility regulation, because as I traveled around Georgia, I mentioned poverty, and I wanted to know, why were people's light bills so high? Why were people in rural Georgia having higher cases of asthma? And why was Albany, Georgia, during COVID, the 4th most infectious place, not in the state, in the country, but in the world? And when you understand pre-existing conditions and you look at institutions like Georgia Tech and Emory University and Morehouse School of Medicine, no one was connecting all those dots, and I saw an opportunity there, and it paid off.
Well, I speak for everybody here. We're grateful for your work that you're doing now and for being an ally for these issues. Now, you are a person of faith.
Yes.
And these are all people of faith. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your personal faith grounds you in the work that you're doing, and are there aspects of your faith that help to empower you to do the work that you're doing, call you to it?
Yeah, so I didn't really grow up in church. I grew up in a very religious household. So again, my family was Caribbean. They're very proud people. We are very much in alignment with our faith and our value system. But it wasn't until, just to share a personal story, when I was a senior in high school, my father was shot multiple times, and he almost died. And that was the first time that I had to really, at an early age, lean on my faith. You know, all of us, pray before we eat, pray before we go to bed. We do the motions, right? But it's not until there is a life-changing event where you have to rely and lean on what you believe. And fortunately, my father was able to live another 11 years. But it was the first time that I really felt that there had to be a purpose for me. And even though that had nothing to do with my career from like where I am now, it shaped my character, right? And I think that what we have to remember, and where I am now, is the work we are doing, it gets overwhelming. We're living in a time where suicide and depression they're at all-time highs. I'm very proud that the Environmental Protection Agency offers services for self-care within our organization to be able to rely on that. So in the days that are hard, I regularly, pray, and I regularly, kind of prepare myself mentally, spiritually, and physically, because the work, somebody said to me in the back, they were like, man, I wish you would have, been at the Public Service Commission. I actually think I got to upgrade. So I'm happy to be in the position I'm in, but I've been in 5 cities in the last 12 days. And so being able to be a husband and a father, and being able to, even though I like to think I'm young, travel that much, you have to have a higher power to help you to navigate on those days where you don't feel like you have everything you need, or the balance that it takes to help you to get through those tough times. So I rely heavily on it. I don't wear it on my shoulder. I just think that it's something that guides me and keeps me honest when I go into rooms and make commitments to people. I think integrity is very important, and regardless of a person's faith or religion, I think that aligns with, you know, a person's value system.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned in your remarks, you talked a little bit about the infrastructure package that was passed. Excuse me. And there are climate provisions that are currently underway in Congress now that would have a lot of impacts, surely across the Southeast and especially here in Georgia. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you know, the package that's already been passed, the funds that should make their way to the state. How do Georgians stand to benefit from that, and what are kind of the environmental benefits of some of those funding?
You know, here's the thing, guys. You know, the one thing that you all should really understand about the urgency of this package is that this is the first time in the history of EPA that this much funds has been available. I mean, my generation didn't experience the New Deal, right? The New Deal was transformative for the United States. Well, this is our generation's New Deal. This infrastructure bill, $50 billion committed to water infrastructure in the U.S., a significant portion of that goes through Region 4. So even though I'm a Georgia boy at heart, we have to disseminate that money throughout the areas. Another area that we've been able to really prioritize is the west side, Vine City and English Avenue, which lead contamination in the soil that deals with the brain development of young children. We've been able to add Vine City and English Avenue to the national priorities list. And that is a tremendous step that we've been able to take. But as it relates to Bill, when you think about it, one of the areas that's most significant is EPA. Prior to this legislation, we had between $300,000 and $800,000 in grants towards certain programming that we committed to. In one of our program areas alone, from $300,000 to $800,000, we're now at $5 to $10 million. So I want you to think about that. We've gone from $300,000 to $800,000 to millions of dollars that we can have through grant programs that can support communities that need it most. It's a bigger pot of money to play with. On brownfields and Superfund sites, brownfields are, in my opinion, some of the best ways to transform communities, to look at opportunities that can redevelop and repurpose. We see a lot of gentrification that happens in low and moderate income communities. What EPA likes to do is we have what's called an interagency working group that focuses on our work with the Department of Transportation, with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I just returned from the first ever Georgia Black Farmers Tour. And so, you know, to be able to work with agencies to get the grants out to these communities, it's great to be in Metro Atlanta, but how many of you all have been 50 miles outside of Atlanta? Raise your hand. How many of y'all been, keep your hand up if you've been out of 100 miles outside of Metro Atlanta. So this is a good group. Because too often we see people that know Atlanta and they might have gone to Helen, Georgia, they might have gone to Lake Lanier, but they've never been to Valdosta, right? They've never been to Burke County, Georgia, where there are nuclear plants, and they've never seen areas around our state that show the tremendous amount of coastline that we have. So the bipartisan infrastructure law does two really cool things for the state of Georgia and every other state in our region. It offers an immediate opportunity for organizations that are in faith-based communities and educations of higher learning to tap in and work with us. But here's the beautiful thing about Bill. We get opportunities through EPA for technical assistance. So for some smaller organizations that might not have steady grant writers or institutions that may not have the capacity to write these grants and execute them, EPA can now come in and support that process, help through the process, but also build capacity on making sure that those organizations have a better chance of being awarded a grant. And then the second thing that I think is really amazing for the state is when you think about Georgia, there's so much untapped potential. So when you think of the rural parts of our state and the opportunity for us to protect and preserve some of the most important parts, whether it's North Georgia mountains or it's some of our waters in these areas, you know, dealing with water pollutions, with PFAS, which are chemicals that are found in so many other areas, we're very privileged to be able to have an administrator and a president that believes in replacing lead lines and water infrastructure capacity. These are things that the state of Georgia and other states need, and EPA is in a position right now to deploy the capital and resources to make that happen.
Yeah, it's huge to have the agency funded at that level to be able to do that work. And you mentioned, right now the purview is 3-ish years left to do your work, and there's it sounds like a long time, but it's no time at all. And so as you look across the region and Georgia specifically, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see for neighborhoods and communities, and what are some of the strategies that you're hoping to put in place to address those?
Some of the challenges in Georgia? So Dr. King said, he has this quote that I say all the time. My wife rolls her eyes because she knows it's coming, right? But I think and I'm going to give you the quote, but I think that we need to understand the urgency, right? So the quote says, the true measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy, right? I think the first challenge, even though it's seemingly not an environmental issue, is our ability to get this message beyond the walls of these rooms. To me, it's easier for us to have the right people in place for water and air issues than for us to get people outside to understand the importance of getting their homes tested for radon, right? Getting their homes tested for mold contamination. We have to do a better job across the board with all of our quote-unquote alphabet soup, right? All the federal agencies. We have to do a better job of making scientific and complicated things more measurable and applicable for people that are not here, right? So, and I'll give you a quick example. I won't say his name, but I had a pretty well-known entertainer reach out to me a couple of weeks ago, and he said, hey man, I just bought 300 acres in Georgia. I want to teach kids how to farm, right? So now that puts me in a very unique position to use a program that EPA can probably collaborate with to teach kids that their potatoes and their meat doesn't come from Kroger, right? Because and that's a part of what we need to understand. Food deserts exist. The other White House initiative I was on was Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. And so we had to deal with childhood obesity. I had to go into areas where within 5 square miles there were 2 Wendy's, a McDonald's, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't want to sit here and just drop a whole bunch of corporate names, but the fact is there wasn't a Whole Foods, right? There weren't farmers markets, there weren't community gardens. So to be able to change that narrative is one of the biggest and the heaviest lifts for me. A second one, I think, from a challenge standpoint, is really connecting the challenges, whether it's in Juliet, Georgia with coal ash, or it's with, Southwest Atlanta with the national priorities list and testing, or it's in coastal Georgia with looking at plastic pollution and technologies that can help us to bring into the fold, or it's getting our technical colleges and our historically black colleges, especially the land-grant colleges, actively involved and engaged with USDA and other organizations and entities. I think we need to create more pipelines that allow us to work together collectively and not in silos, right? So the same way how you look at what GIPL does, GIPL is attached to a larger interfaith power and light that's an actual network. We need more networks to be able to build capacity around the state so that when there's an issue, right, and here's the best example I can give you. A year ago, we saw the horrific challenges that the AAPI community faced with the shootings that happened in Atlanta. 800 people showed up for a rally, right? Within 48 hours, 800 people showed up. Well, we need those 800 people to show up for coal ash. We need those 800 people to show up for Asthma Awareness Month. We need to multiply those audiences every time, because if we can go from 800 to 1,600 to 2,400, right, to 3,200, if we can keep replicating those numbers, then there's nothing that we can't do in the state. And that's a part of coalition building. As a regional administrator for a federal agency, a part of my title is not activist, right? Now, granted, and I'm not saying that in a disingenuous way, at heart, I know I'm an advocate, right? But there are certain things that I'm restricted to do that you all have to be on the front line to do, so that when I'm able to come into the room, our job is that you guys have gotten the people there, we offer the resources, and now you take those resources and go back into the community and do the work that has to be done.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you've kind of touched on this already, but I want to ask you more directly. Traditionally, we've thought about environment or conservation or climate in a bubble of sorts. It's its own issue. It's set aside. You've talked today, and we're trying to make those links between how environment and climate is linked to public health concerns, how it has impacts on things like food deserts and nutrition, like you talked about, transportation, linkages to the same kinds of injustices that police brutality derives itself from. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of considering all these different intersections when we're talking about environmental work, because it seems like when you're talking about it, you're talking about a lot more than just protecting and planting some trees, right? You're talking about neighborhoods and communities.
So here is an opportunity, right, for all of you. Every crisis moment that happens where the attention of the people is centered around a particular issue, right? And I don't want to get too political and start naming them. So whatever came to your head, that issue. We have to find ways to rally around it and to make the parallels so that movements aren't separated. The only reason, and what I'm about to say, I'm going to be sensitive about saying it. Within a few months span, we saw Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd live out in real time. It's my belief that the only reason those things had a tremendous impact the way they had was because we were forced to be in our houses during a pandemic, without the NBA playoffs, without live events, without the distractions that could allow us to change the channel. We have to commit ourselves to making this conversation a habit and not something that we can turn off and turn on as we please. Because there are people that live the things we're fighting for every day. There are folks in this room that can afford a Tesla with solar panels on their roof, and there are folks that are in apartments a quarter of the size of the homes you live in with a higher utility bill. That's a problem. So we need to commit ourselves to knowing that social justice, even though it's a scary word to some people, encompasses every aspect of justice. Justice is justice, period. So when we think of, criminal justice reform, a couple of years ago, I had a chance to go to the south side of Chicago and address multiple gangs in Chicago. And I made the intersection of gang violence and climate change. How? Because in summer months, crime goes up. So if we get hotter summers, we get more aggressive crime, right? I mean, this is data that literally has been supported by the federal government, by the FBI, crime statistics. All this stuff is measurable, right? So we have to now change the narrative of how we engage them. So if you think about the issue that's important to you, like water, we missed an opportunity with the Flint water crisis because we made people think it was just Flint. We didn't talk about the Savannah River. We didn't talk about the other rivers that were polluted 10 times the Flint River challenge that was faced, right? So we have to take these opportunities and create long-term opportunities and roles that we can play in supporting the work that has to be done. And we have to create spaces where, when especially young people are affected, bring them in. And don't bring them in to sit at the table, bring them here, right? We have to do a better job of giving young people a platform on our boards, in the rooms, and we have to talk to them and not at them. And if you like, I have 3 sons that I like to think are pretty smart, right? Go figure. But for my children, on all seriousness, when things happen, I sit my kids down and I watch their body language and I watch how they are. And when we talk about these parallels, we have to do a better job of measuring the room, but then also going outside of the rooms that we're in and looking at the communities and just asking, is this issue important to you? And I think that would go a long way. Last example I'll give on that is asthma. Asthma is a great place to start with the amount of school days that are missed from children, the amount of work days that are missed from adults, and the fact that so many people are living with asthma. 2 of my friends are retired NFL athletes, and my son, who plays football, has an emergency inhaler on the sideline and is a standout athlete. Well, that's a great way to talk to athletes about asthma. So why doesn't GIPL, right, host a platform where we can have diverse conversations that include our faith and our responsibility, but also common sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I've got one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. Also, be thinking about what you want to ask. You mentioned Juliet, and coal ash, which is something that we've been working on for a long time. A lot of these people in this audience know a lot about coal ash. You know, up until recently, Georgia had about 29 coal ash ponds around. And recently, the administration had issued some guidance, I think particular to the Midwest and some coal ash ponds out there, and sort of reiterated the idea that it was inappropriate for coal ash to be stored in submerged in groundwater. And we're very appreciative of that. Just a couple of weeks ago, in the integrated resource planning process, Georgia Power testified to the fact that they are planning to close in place some coal ash ponds, including the one in Juliet, in contact with groundwater. And so I just wanted to lift that up, and I'll let you do what you will with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what, you know, I got to brag on my boss a little bit, but I think the examples that we're setting should show that something is different within EPA, right? I mean, we literally are, we just announced outside of coal ash, which I'll touch on, we're going to increase unannounced enforcement. So inspections. So now in areas, especially in legacy pollution communities, we're unapologetically going to work with our state partners like the EPD in the state of Georgia, and we're going to come into states that we know are polluting, and we're going to show up, and we're going to knock on doors, and we're going to hold them accountable, right? If that means by finding them or by getting them in position to do the right thing, that's what we're going to do, and we're going to continue to support organizations and entities that are going to do the right thing, but we have to hold them accountable. And so the coal ash rule that was mentioned, like many of you, that's been a tremendously important and high priority issue when you talk about groundwater contamination. My background is in groundwater contamination, water infrastructure, and utility regulation. So when I hear about these areas specifically around coal ash and the challenges that folks in Juliet and other parts of the state have faced, and the work that they have done tirelessly, when people have literally just wanted to be heard. And the stories that I've heard, not just out of Juliet, but around the country, of creeks that people played in as a child that their grandchildren and children can't play in, or areas that they found near and dear to them. Like we can't replace too often much of the damage that have occurred over time. But here's the thing. Go outside of this room and ask most regular people about coal ash, and they're just not going to know what you're talking about. Nor are they going to understand how, if they live in Atlanta, something that's going on, you know, hundreds of miles away from them. So we have to do a better job of taking this coal ash message and making it better and more palatable so that we understand the direct and indirect impact it has, especially when we talk about, like, you know, the linings that have to happen, the challenges over time, the levels of contamination in these different areas. There's been no urgency on it, and I'm proud to serve an administration that has prioritized it, but has taken a campaigning platform and put it directly into governance. And it's something that we're committed to. There's so much more that's coming that I'm very proud of that I cannot speak on right now, but there are several rules that we're making that are going to be not only enforceable, but that are, I think, going to set precedent. And I think that folks that believe in EJ are going to be very proud of what we accomplish over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, thank you. We're grateful for the reality that when there are corporations or utilities that may not prioritize justice, that we have some people in an administration that do. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions. If you could just show a hand. Gayla, could I get you to take this mic to those people?
Could you keep your hands raised? Cool. Just start right here.
Good afternoon now, I guess. I'm Brian Savoy. I'm with the Catholic group here. Grew up on the shores of the Mississippi River, 30 miles from Cancer Alley. My parents live across the river from a huge ammonia plant, Cornerstone Chemicals, 2 miles across the river from their house. I really appreciate the changes EPA has made with the inspections coming into St. James Parish in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. Professionally, I've also spent a lot of time in Houston, especially the southwest side of Houston, where when the lights go down at night, the smell of the air changes because all the plants running up and down the Houston Navigation Channel are dumping overnight. So much you can smell it when you step out of your hotel room after dinner. or going to dinner. My question is, those are in Texas and those are in Louisiana. For Georgia, are there any issues as significant as those areas?
100%. Right. So one thing we have to understand is, because Cancer Alley was so prominent, right, as far as what people know, and it's been referred to so many times, and you look at, for example, the petrochemical industry, the things that you spoke about, we don't have Louisiana. It's interesting you said Louisiana and Texas. If you dropped in Mississippi, which is in my region, the Journey for Justice tour started with Administrator Regan. He started off in these states to go directly to the communities that were impacted by those industries and to speak to them. And we actually had gotten into a little bit of hot water because, unfortunately, the states that worked with these local organizations and grassroots organizations felt they were left out of the conversation. We felt it is a priority because too often in these communities, there's an intimidation. It's just like if you went to go vote, right, and they had sheriffs that were at predominantly black and brown precincts, it can be seen as an intimidation factor. So some of the things that we're doing, which relates to the state of Georgia and why I think that it's equally the same, when you look at the Savannah River site, for example, and the fact that Georgia has an active nuclear construction that is going on, right? The ecosystems that are affected, tritium that is in water, contaminating areas, it unfortunately can compromise a woman's reproductive system. These are areas that have long-term impacts on these communities. When you look at chemicals, especially PFAS, and a lot of these contaminants that affect and impact our agricultural society. This is food that we're putting in our bodies every single day. And in southern states where we rely on agriculture and agribusiness, we have to consider those areas and the challenges that we face. We depend heavily on fisheries in Georgia. And when you think about it, right, there are areas where fish have high levels of mercury or plastics in it. So to one person, they may see Cancer Alley, the petrochemical area, as more of a priority. But if you tell the people in Juliet, Georgia, that have been facing some of those same issues, that issue is harder or longer, I would argue that it's not based on the priority or the prominence of an issue. It's more so for every 5 issues they can show, we've got 5 or 7 right here in the state of Georgia. It's just that, unfortunately, those areas have not had as much of a, connection with the urgency that some of the other areas have. Thank you for your question.
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm Tina Wilkinson, and I'm on the board of GIPL. We appreciate you coming out.
Thank you for your service.
I wanted to ask about the war in Ukraine and the administration's plans to open up more lands for drilling. And I understand it's a very difficult issue, and I understand that our hearts are breaking for the people in Ukraine, and we have to do something, but it seems to be kind of the wrong thing. I'm not sure. And then I also wanted to ask, isn't there a case pending before the Supreme Court that might take away some of the EPA's ability to legislate? Maybe it's just CO2. I can't remember exactly what's pending. There's something pending.
Yeah, it's not to legislate. It's on the enforcement side. There's always been challenges administration to administration. Enforcement activity went down during the previous administration. That's not necessarily uncommon. It's just that it really went down under the previous administration, a lot of regulatory practices, and there were things in place that were supposed to help to address those issues, right? So I think more so on that litigation issue, because I'm not as familiar if there's something separate that you were talking about. I can't speak further on it, but on the enforcement side, you're absolutely correct. Secondly, on Ukraine, I'll start off with the direct role EPA has. But a lot of what you're hearing about the drilling is a decision coming out of the region. It's coming from the administration, not directly from EPA. While Mr. Regan is a cabinet member, the policies that are coming from the administration are totally separate from my purview, and I don't want to misspeak or give you any information that's not accurate. What I will say is that the thing I am proud of between the Ukraine and U.S. situation as it relates to our support and help is knowing and understanding fundamentally that I had to be briefed on 2 specific issues, water infrastructure and nuclear facilities. So we had to have high-level briefings because when you think of the threat of cybersecurity and the attacks on our systems, unfortunately, when we're projecting the compromises that can happen to many of our systems that too often are outdated, right? You have some water systems in the US that are on software that's 20 and 30 years old. So our focus at EPA is to make sure that we can fundamentally protect the structures that are in place, work with the Army Corps of Engineers, work with the Department of Agriculture, work with Homeland Security, and make sure that we're putting things in place now that have a direct impact on what's going on overseas. If you remember, during a really heightened part of the aggression between Russia, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, we saw Chernobyl and other areas that had been occupied. That's really scary, right? But it's even more concerning where our region has nuclear facilities and we have to work continuously. And I'm not saying that because anyone should be concerned. What we have to be prepared. And emergency management and response is one of the most critical aspects of my job, not just as it relates to extreme weather like tornadoes and hurricanes, but as it relates to the threat of an attack on our grid. Many people don't know, and thank you for asking that question, that EPA also plays a security role. Right? They know about our air and water and land, kind of like, the aspects of that, but they don't know about the role we play as it relates to global conflict and how it would happen in the U.S. So I appreciate the question. I can't speak to that directly, but I do appreciate your interest in it. Thank you.
Hi, excuse me, this is Barbara Pryor. I'm Barbara Pryor with Dunwoody United Methodist Church Environmental Stewards. And something I've found, and thank you so much for spending so much time with us today and sharing all your knowledge with us. One thing I've been concerned about is the Okefenokee right here on our back door, and what this drilling company, I think it's Three Pines out of Alabama, what is going on with that permit right now? I know you all have ended up having to be involved a little differently than you were.
Can I do this with all due respect? And if you could open up for another question. No, hold on to the mic. I just want to let you know personally, I appreciate the question, but I am, unfortunately, because there's open litigation, I'm not able to respond to that in a public setting. I do appreciate your concern, and there is ongoing work that EPA is doing in the state of Georgia to address and be engaged with those issues. It's just that I cannot go further in that area.
I understand that, and I appreciate that you all are involved.
Yes, ma'am.
And that you know probably that we're all very concerned, and we're behind you to
Thank you.
help us with that.
Just know this, that we are committed to doing the right thing across the board and doing everything in our power as an agency to protect the mission and the integrity of our communities and of our environment.
Thank you so much.
So do you want to just... I think this gentleman had his hand up right here. I saw a couple, but I'm...
Wait, which one? Oh.
Hey, Daniel, I'm Bert Pierce from the UU Congregation of Atlanta.
I met you in the food line.
You did meet me in the food line, and I was at one of your, I'm sorry to drag you back into your pre-EPA days, but I met you at one of your Public Service Commission rallies over in Tucker or Stone Mountain. So my question is, I think you'd probably agree, if I were to walk out on the street here and pick 100 people and ask them, do you know what our Georgia Public Service Commission does? Probably maybe one might be able to answer that question, 1 out of 100. And this is an incredible frustration to me. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on how to get people better educated throughout the state on what the PSC does and to get out and vote. Because if I'm not mistaken, the voting level for the PSC positions is much lower than voting for other, like governor and so on and so forth. So,
yeah. So to that question, realistically, the challenge is twofold, right? I mean, not speaking as an elected official, there has to be an understanding that if there's not a commitment in and out of an election year, it's not going to change. Right? If I talk to my kids about being good kids on the weekend and not during the week, it's a high probability that they're going to do something stupid Monday through Friday, right? Public Service Commission terms are 6-year terms. You can't come to someone every 4 or 6 years and talk about your utility bill. And it goes back to the example I gave earlier about those 800 that showed up for that rally, right? What has to happen each and every year in any issue is the folks that are motivated around it. You know, I think during the time that I was in that capacity, more people in the history of this state came out for that election than any other time, right? So I think it's incumbent upon people that vote to find out where those people are and to re-engage them. Not because someone's on the ballot, but because it's our responsibility each and every day to commit to helping our community be smarter and more educated and more informed. So I would do that, but then I would also just commit yourself to doing simple things. I don't think most people understand it. Here's one thing that we're trying to change at EPA. Most people don't realize how important it is and how effective it is when you just do your part. Like for one person, it's writing greeting cards, right? For somebody else, it's making phone calls. For somebody else, it's getting their church to hold a forum on clean energy. For somebody else, it's working with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta to address asthma awareness. And when everyone does their part, it goes from 5 separate pieces to this, right? If we keep doing this, then we're doing things back and forth, but there's no collaboration until this happens. And until we're able to bring people together and not because someone's on the ballot, right? We have to start thinking, is there a person right now who, if their power gets cut off, their insulin goes bad? Regardless if they vote or not, regardless if they believe as a Republican or a Democrat, is there someone right now that needs to understand what I know? The more we do that, I think the more we'll have people involved. So thank you.
How about a round of applause? Thank you so much for coming and spending an hour of your time with us, and more than that, on a Saturday, Mother's Day weekend. We really appreciate it and appreciate your work. All right, everybody. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take, you've got about a 10 or a 15-minute break, and then we're going to transition out of this space into our workshop rotations, which what you will do is you will just go outside of these doors, and you will take a left, and there will be people there who will help guide you. It's just right downstairs. There are informational tables from Georgia Conservation Voters, the Atlanta Archdiocese, and Creation Justice Ministries down there that you can interact with. The workshops will start at 1 o'clock. And the first rotation, you have 3 options. They're listed downstairs. They're also on your table. You have Green Team 101. You've got Weathering the Storm, Building Climate Resiliency in Our Faith Communities, and Environmental Injustice, Fighting the Biomass Industry in Real Time. So take 12 minutes now. Actually, take 10 so you can be seated in your rooms before 1 o'clock. And thank you all for being here. Get some more coffee, get a little snack, stretch your legs, and we'll start again at 1 o'clock.